Okay. We are ready to call to order the 117th meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. We're at the Convention Center as usual, 10:30 in the morning on April 17th. Just for planning purposes, before we get started, one of the commissioners has to leave. Commissioner Zuniga has to leave later on today. So we're going to run through lunch. We're going to go until about 1:30. So we won't stop for a lunch break until about 1:30. And we will now jump directly to the approval of the minutes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there are three sets of minutes in the commissioner's packet, but only two are noticed on the agenda. The March 6 minutes are not, so I'm going to defer approval of those until our next meeting. There's no urgency to that, and I think just to make sure that all our i's are dotted and t's are crossed, we'll do that. So I would ask if there are any comments on the March 20 minutes, the second set that is in the packet, and if there are not, then I'd move the approval of them with the usual reservation of corrections for technical and typographical errors.
So moved.
And
Second.
Any comments? All in favor of adoption? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
And we'll turn then to the April 3rd minutes, and I'd make the same motion there that they be approved in the form contained in the packet with the usual reservation for typographical and mechanical errors. Correction, typographical and mechanical errors.
Second? Somebody?
Second.
I actually had a couple of comments on this. On page 3, at the 3:30 afternoon PM item, just to clarify something which we've now talked about off and on.
Right.
The third to the last line starts out, a Category 1 license if it is awarded the license, And I'd like to change that to something like, if it accepts the award of the license. Because this is the issue that MGM wasn't 100% sure what we were talking about, and if they accept the award rather than awarded.
Yeah, I think there was some internal ambiguity there too. So to make it clear, I think that's what we all intended.
Right, that's what we intended, we've clarified it, but just for the record, and then in the 407, this is close to small potatoes, but it says, motion made by Commissioner Zuniga that the Commission accept the recommendation as elected Director of Vanderlyn in terms of selecting the University of Massachusetts to conduct a cohort study at a date later determined by the Commission, which date will be reviewed and voted on by the Commission. Because it's the date that we agreed we will need to approve before we go forward. So again, just to make it a little bit more precise. So it's at a cohort study at a date later determined by the Commission, comma, which date will be reviewed on and voted on by the Commission.
It's really commencing at a date, right? Because it's going to extend over a period of time. But the drift, yeah, that.
Right.
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Me too.
Any other comments, discussion?
So I'd amend then the motion to move for approval of these minutes with those two corrections and subject to any mechanical or typographical corrections that
Okay.
need to be made.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it unanimously.
Okay.
Now, get to the meat of our day. Ombudsman Ziemba.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. The focus of my report today will primarily relate to timeline issues in Regions A, B, and C. First, we'll start with a discussion of the Region C schedule and how a request for a variance from our minimum capital investment requirement may have an impact on that schedule. Next, we'll hear from a panel from MGM, including Mike Mathis, President of MGM Springfield, and Jed Nozel and Marty Nastasia from Brown Rudnick, representing MGM Springfield. Finally, we will discuss variance requests to the Commission's Region A arbitration schedule. I would ask if we could first start with item 3B, which is a request for a variance from the Commission's minimum capital investment regulations. Just as a point of clarification, what we're talking about here are exclusions and what is included in the total amount for meeting the $500 million statutory minimum capital investment requirement. And that requirement relates to what is submitted in an application to the commission. To the degree that an applicant wants to exceed that minimum, they are fully welcome to do so. And to the degree that a community wishes to engage in a dialogue with an applicant on what minimum they would like pursuant to a host community agreement or otherwise, that is certainly not prohibited under our regulations, and indeed that was a major focus in another area of the state. So in that regard, I'm going to turn to Commissioner Zuniga, who's prepared a memorandum for your consideration.
Yes, thank you. I wrote a memorandum that's included in the packet to try to frame the discussion. I would turn first to the third page, an attachment to that memorandum, which is titled "The Market Shares Under Full Competition Scenarios," that comes from the analysis that our consultants did for us, HLT, when we evaluated the Category 2 license. The Commission will remember that this calculation was relative to the whole state. It's centered around what the different scenarios for the Category 2 proponents at the time were projecting. These are our own projections, or that of our consultants, but they had to be placed or seen through the lens of what would each of the operations do to the other markets, to the region A, B, and C. What's labeled here is Boston, Springfield, and Taunton, but I'll remind ourselves that they really are Region A and Region B and Region C. Springfield was the only proponent at the time, so it was a shorthand for Region B. And Taunton was selected as the geographic center for that region. But it doesn't presume that, that this is what we were projecting for a casino from the Mashpee, for example. So what I want to highlight here is on the what's highlighted under the Plainville Penn National full competition scenario. The gross gaming revenues for each, it looks like this, Commissioner.
Location of document?
Yeah,
3B.
3B at the end of my memo. Sorry, I'm starting backwards, but the market that we have come up with, which is the centerpiece for how much of a capital investment could be attained, is different for each of the regions. Perhaps with no surprise, the Boston area, or the Region A, has the most market potential in terms of gross gaming revenues at $749 million. The Category 1 Region B has $452 million in potential gross gaming revenues, and this again is under the full competition scenario where all of the licenses have been awarded. While the Region C has less market at $370 million of gross gaming revenues a year. Can everybody see where what I'm saying? Now, there's two tables here. We could pick either one. I picked the top. At the time, our consultants were projecting a low scenario and a high scenario for the slots parlor, so the numbers only change for the slots parlor applicant. What I want to highlight is the relative difference between the three regions when it comes to gross gaming revenue, which in my mind really speaks to the potential, that's really the potential of the market, and hence the potential for the capital investment. So under that lens, I think it's really fair to say that the region that would have the most difficulty meeting a minimum capital investment, especially as we have defined it, would obviously be Region C. I can take questions now or keep going to the
Are you
other
looking
part
at
of my
the
memo.
Taunton column on your chart?
Yes. So comparatively, the Region C, compared to the other regions, has less market potential, just by virtue of the number of adults that are in that region.
And by virtue of the competitive situation.
That's right.
I mean, you mentioned in your memo, it says it's unique from different from other regions because of the tribal situation, which it clearly is, but it's also unique because it's got a slots parlor, Chief by Jowl, and it's got a full-blown casino, Twin Rivers, within their target catchment area. So it's unique in a lot of respects. The competition nearby by the slots parlor that's already been awarded is already reflected in this number. Yeah, no, I just was referring to
Right.
you. Right.
Yes. However, the prior point is an important one, which is not reflected in the number, which is a commercial license in that region would have to share a disproportionate amount of gaming revenues with an eventual MASH-B operation.
Well, why is that limited to that one?
It's not.
We've heard from other applicants that they too think that, particularly with the reduced tax, that they too are going to be affected by the MASH.
That's right. It's not. But they would have the bulk of that effect.
Why?
Now, because of its proximity. Now, so under a scenario where the MASH-B get land into trust and eventually build a casino, this whole chart would change. There would be, everybody would be affected. Region A, Region B, Region C, which is your point. But Region C would be the most affected.
Well, that depends on a number of scenarios, doesn't it? After all, these casinos are supposed to be casinos that bring in new money from out of state, not simply feed on in-state gamblers. There's going to be some of that, of course. But the whole premise is that these places are going to bring people in from out of state and therefore contribute new revenues to the coffers and not simply shift around revenue that's already here and being spent. So the degree to which there is a proximity effect is going to depend in some way on the inability of the casino to bring in new money from out of state.
I don't disagree with that, and there's also I would note there's a market estimate from neighboring states on each one of these regions highlighted in the. Now, category ones are the market assessment for category 2 was a lot more straightforward because there was the 30-minute or 60-minute drive as the centerpiece of it.
Right, I agree.
Category 1s are going to be a little bit more complex
Right.
for part of your point, which is how much tourism can these operations bring. But the simpler point is that the relative size of the market of these, even without a MASH-B operation, is less for Region
You say
C.
without a MASH-B, without a fourth casino.
Without a fourth casino,
Assuming
right?
that the Taunton here represents the commercial
That's
casino,
correct.
not the MASH-B, yeah.
That's correct.
So when
Is-
there's a fourth with zero's tax rate, it's going to have a distorting effect on
Right.
everybody if that happens.
That's right.
Right.
So,
Just one point, Commissioner McHugh, the priority, I would say probably priority number 1 is repatriating Massachusetts dollars that are now out of state. Priority 2 is new money from out of state, and priority 3 is local regurgitation. But
Well,
repatriating is a big part
No,
of the picture.
I understand that repatriation is an important part of this, but I think the idea was beyond repatriation. I agree, it's a significant portion. But the repatriation too depends on making what's better here than what's there.
Yes,
to paraphrase somebody.
yes. And size of the facility matters. So it's a bit of an art as well. It's not just a straightforward calculation. That's the premise of the whole gravity model, that a bigger facility would attract gamers from larger or further away.
Right.
You know, but so, however, you know, the main point as well is something that that is not really explicit in my memo, but I think we're alluding to this, is there's a risk that has to be evaluated fundamentally by the respondents. And that risk is, you know, the eventual very nearby operation of the Mashpee. And I say eventual because there's a lot of things, as we all know, that have to happen for that process to come to fruition. I first talked a lot with our consultants relative to try to quantify that, and really coalesced around the notion that it's very hard, and we're not in a position to make those kinds of calculations. It's really up to the respondent on, you know, first of all, if we even get a bid. So that's not something that that I'm prepared to try to quantify. What I really wanted to highlight here is just the relative size in terms of market from those regions, which in my view is the most compelling argument for us to entertain the waiver that has been put before us relative to the inclusion or exclusion of certain costs. I think we should. So, which would lead me to my memo. What I try to do in this memo is to group the what I saw were 4 categories of the costs that are presently excluded from our regulations. The first one is infrastructure costs. The Commission will probably remember that we had a lot of discussion about this, the merit of excluding certain of these costs. We drew a line along the property boundaries and said inside it's included, outside it's excluded. The reality is that those costs are going to be incurred, same, whether they're inside or outside. I would argue that in the order of priorities, if we entertain relief of certain costs, that this would be at the top. They are necessary, they are capital investment, they may come because of host or surrounding community agreements, and you'll remember, Mr. Chairman, that that's the one particular category that you had the most difficulty accepting this line around the property lines.
I only ended up voting for it because at that stage of the game, everybody was talking about investments so far beyond 500 million that I decided it was academic. But now that we're at this, I never, that never made sense to me anyway, and so I would certainly agree with you. But just when you're using the word property boundaries, is that the word from our regs? Is that synonymous, to move us to another topic, to gaming establishment?
I don't have I don't think boundaries is in our reg, but we did talk a lot on and delineated these costs as inside or outside the property.
Yeah, I just was wondering whether it casts any light on the other conversation.
Yeah, 205, 12203, and 12204. Catherine, if you have the language there ready.
Jim is looking it up.
Oh, I printed though.
It says, 4 says, costs associated with designing, improving, or constructing the infrastructure outside the property boundaries of the site of the gaming establishment.
Property boundaries of the site of the gaming establishment.
Of the gaming establishment.
So it does make them pretty much, you know,
Yes.
implies that that's what
Right.
we were meaning, right? So I wanted to make that point. Does anybody, just before you go any further, does anybody disagree that we should waive some of this, that we should loosen up the definition?
I'm not sure that we should. I would like to hear from others. Are we creating, especially for those who have chosen to already have made the decision to play by our rules and have invested in other regions? I'd be interested in hearing if they think this gives this is not a fair playing field, because at this point, we're looking to do this. So I'm not sure. I'm open to, but I just don't know that we've done that yet. We haven't heard from anyone about this.
Well, we've asked anybody to
know.
comment. And
Well-
Right.
nobody's, I don't think, has anybody objected from the other regions?
Not
Not from the other regions.
not from the other regions. Well,
Region C. one.
I would put it this way. Everybody so far has met or exceeded the minimum capital investment. Had there been somebody who had not met it under this definition and had been, say, excluded from continuing, I think would be in a scenario that you may be alluding, Commissioner, that would be unfair. I do, and so I am in favor of, if we're going to do a waiver, this would be the cost that's easiest for me to waive on, because these are the necessary costs. The boundary was, had a degree of arbitrariness, if that's a word. But your point is not unreasonable, and we could wait to
Well,
hear from
You
others.
asked whether anybody was, I
No, I'm
forgot
sorry,
what you asked.
I meant here, I meant did any of us?
Oh, I just wanted to say, I too am unpersuaded at this point that we ought to waive any of these costs. I'd like to hear more, but there's also some other things I'd like to say, but
Okay,
I don't think it's intuitively obvious that we should.
okay. Well, why don't you go ahead? So let's go ahead and with your analysis.
Right.
I mean, we could sort of debate it in the abstract, or we could wait till Commissioner finishes his, okay, so.
Well, if there is some persuaded, maybe going down what I thought was the order of priorities might not get us much further, but a second category is land costs, which the statute specifically gives us the discretion to exclude or include land costs. They come in different forms, as we see. They could be or rather, the land comes in different forms from different applicants. Some may be already existing owners. Others who want to come in and bid would have to purchase that land. So furthermore, land comes with different degrees of additional costs. For example, remediation, which is included in our definition of capital expenditures. So seemingly a contamination-free land, which purchase price is higher, would be excluded from our capital investment calculation, but land with some liability, because it would require cleanup, the cost of remediation would be included presently under our
Not the cost of the land, but just the cost.
just the cost of the remediation. So with that dichotomy, I would argue that, we should consider whether, at least for certain region C in this case, obviously, the cost of land may be included. The initial, when I first thought about these regulations, the cost of land was an easy thing to exclude, because it never depreciates, for one, and it's not one thing that is often thought of as capital investment. But in this case, it can certainly be.
Is there a metric that you could use to standardize the different financial structures so that you could count land equally? In other words, it's clear if you go out and buy the land, that's an easy number. But if you contribute the land, like Mr. Carney was in Raynham, that's a less easy number.
Yep.
And if you're leasing the land, that's a less easy. You can capitalize the, so is there a reliable methodology where you could always have apples to apples? It struck me that this is hard. You have to do some real contortions to try to figure out how to handle this equitably if we.
Well, the only thing that comes to mind now, but we could also ask for more comment or do more research. The thing that comes to mind is we could cap this at a certain percentage, for example. We could say land costs could be could be included up to a maximum of 10%, 5%.
How would Carney how would that have factored in? He contributes the land.
Right, well, depending on the percentage, they would only be able to count the capital investment up to a certain point.
So you would count that?
You would count partially.
The contribution?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So that seems to me to be quite contrary to the real intent here. They wanted, the legislature wanted a minimum of $500 million in cash coming into the economy. You know, I think that was the idea. So if you can count the value of your land towards the 500 million, I think that would really undercut. So if a Carney couldn't count his because he owns the land in advance, it seems inequitable to me to let other people.
Well,
Well, that was really at the heart of our exclusion the first time around, wasn't it? That the land purchase price didn't really add anything to the economy. It was a transfer of an asset from one person to another without any value being added to anything. The land price is what it is.
Right.
Whether it's contributed or bought.
Right.
And that was the, as I recall,
Or
the
leased,
theme.
or leased, yeah, right,
The theme
Yeah.
underlying our exclusion.
yeah. That makes sense to me. I mean, I think that exclusion makes sense to me for that reason, as well as the complexity of standardizing.
okay. The third category, which I wanted to have a little background in terms of discussion here, is our regulations speak only to carried interest costs and other financing costs. And these I would put in, when I was thinking about these costs with Attorney Grossman, I was thinking of, could this be a category that we, instead of excluding or including, that we wait and see? And I remember crafting a regulation with a wait and see was very difficult. And we always had the waiver provision, which is what we're doing here today, so we could always address them. But I would characterize these costs as very different. They could come in very different forms. In a plain vanilla loan world, interest eligible for capitalization would be generally, by accounting principles and tax purposes, would be capitalized. The IRS lets private entities capitalize interest costs, tag them to the cost of the project, and depreciate them over whatever amount of depreciation they're allowed to do. Under that lens, an interest cost is perfectly legitimate, in my view, to be counted towards the capital investment. On the other side of this continuum, at the other end of this continuum, there's a lot of financial engineering that happens these days where carried interest is really a mechanism for one party or more to take out a profit or a participation, which is not, I never thought of as capital investment. So, and there's anywhere in between. Now, excluding carried interest under the one extreme, I think it's perfectly legitimate. And however, including interest costs on the other extreme, I think they're also perfectly legitimate. I would like to say that maybe we could clarify this regulation to mean that we are talking about the interest eligible for capitalization as opposed to a purely carried interest cost. Or we could wait and see what is ultimately presented in terms of a financing structure to this commission to decide whether to include those costs or not. But the crux of the point here is that this could be a rather complex a priori determination.
Two questions. First is the interest portion doesn't necessarily contribute anything to the Massachusetts economy, right? If there's an out-of-state lender, the interest all goes out of state, so there's no benefit to Massachusetts.
Well, if you, true, under that thinking, I could also argue that you really need a loan to build these things, and if you don't, you know, there's no
Yeah, well,
there's
that
no
gets to my
project.
second question, and
Yeah.
that is allowing exclusion of interest and financing costs from the 500 million really favors the more highly leveraged applicant, right? The more highly leveraged the applicant is, the cheaper a building it can put up.
Yes, in the end, yes. Which, if we wanted to normalize, we could also put a limit to the amount of interest. But yes, the one who has the least ability to borrow would borrow at a higher interest cost, and
And
this
also,
would be
the
a higher.
one who had the lower amount of financing would have to put more into the ground.
Right. Now, this starts to get to the point that Ombudsman Siemba was talking about, which is when we compare different applicants, it'll be evident by the amount of amenities that they're proposing and the amount of quality and overall total capital investment. But your point is well taken, Commissioner.
I mean, on that one, again, I think there's, as usual, you come up with some really nuanced thoughts on this, but I think from the standpoint of having money come into the economy, from the standpoint of maximizing the destination resort character of these facilities, and the equity and the disincentives that are created by counting interest, I think this one doesn't make sense to me either. You know, I think the legislature didn't say we can consider whether or not to include interest, for example. You know, it was really, they were really thinking about hard dollars in, both to generate economic impact and to generate and to build facilities that are high quality, not just, you know, convenience casinos. So using that as the objective, as the standard, I think that for my money, this one would fail also. You know, if they're going to try to claim how much money they're putting into it, our total investment is $1.3 billion, and they're counting, you know, capitalized costs and so forth. I mean, that's legit. That is part of the cost. But I don't think that's what the legislature was getting at. You know, that it isn't how much money are you putting up, it's how much cash are you putting into the economy, and how much cash are you putting into amenities to make these destination resorts.
I thought I was going to be able to convince more of you with this argument, but I don't seem to be gaining much traction. I think interest.
Welcome to the club.
I know. Well, I know.
I'm actually not
Very small
convinced we should change anything, I'll be honest with you. I just, we have worked so hard to be consistent in every aspect of our evaluation, and to change now, I don't see, if there's so much risk, then folks maybe shouldn't consider this, and that should be something that, I don't know that we should be the ones to be incentivizing. There is risk, there is uncertainty. I mean, the reason we went down this path to begin with was public officials and citizens saying to us, we need the opportunity in southeastern Mass as well, and there was uncertainty. But to
Well-
change the rules now, our regulations, because of the market analysis was always there, right? Those figures were out there long before, long before the regions were set, and so
Well-
I'm not persuaded we should change this at all.
Let me pick up on the point about responding to local officials, because some of them have been asking that we don't leave that region behind. And I fear
Agreed.
that by setting the bar as high as we have, by virtue of the regulations when it comes to this minimum capital investment, we just might. The 500 million is great to think about it in the abstract, but it's really becoming more and more 800 million, the way we've defined and excluded a lot of necessary costs. So this could very well, it remains to be seen, by the way, we may or may not get one or more applications. Timing is also a concern, so there's a lot of moving pieces here. But I do believe that what the one applicant is, potential applicant, is telling us in their waiver request is precisely that given the risk in that region, the smaller size of that region, and the way we've defined and excluded a lot of necessary costs out of the minimum investment calculation may translate into not getting a bid there in the first place. So that's my concern. That's where I'm coming with the recommendation that we really think about a couple of these categories. I was ready to include at least 2 or 3 of these categories. The fourth one I haven't even spoken about, because that's the one that I was ready to exclude, to continue excluding, which I could talk about now or just admit defeat right now.
No. Talk about the fourth one, because I have some questions about that.
Well, the fourth one is almost like a catch-all on everything else that's generally seen as an expense. Fees, expenses, legal fees are usually thought of, at least in my mind, as not part of a capital investment. So those were perhaps, in my mind, the easiest to exclude. They're necessary. They're real. They actually come up front, as evidenced by how many lawyers follow us and have to follow us and provide us feedback, et cetera. But they are not generally a part of a capital investment in the world of capital investing. So I was aggregating everything else to recommend that we continue to exclude those costs.
The only question I had about this last category is maybe breaking it out even a little bit further, even though I don't think the total dollar amount at the end of the day would flip the equation one way or the other, but certainly local permitting fees, local sewer hookup fees, all related to the capital project, I would argue might be a cost that we would consider. I mean, without one, you won't get the other. I mean, you've kind of lumped a whole bunch of them in, but again, it's an infusion of money into the local government for inspections and building permits and things like that. They can be costly. Again, they're not probably in the big scheme of things, they're probably not a big budget buster, but certainly one doesn't get done without the other. And they aren't necessarily ongoing operational costs as well. I don't know how those have been factored in other projects.
Yeah, no, they
They're
would.
segmenting out a small piece.
Yeah, they're a small piece in my estimation, but they,
They're like tiny, really.
yeah.
In all things considered.
permit fees, local, but the point is not dissimilar to the one I was trying to make relative to interest. You also need them, yeah, I think it would be very easy to include them. I don't know that they will make much of a difference.
So small, and it's hardly worth the trouble. It seems to me Commissioner Cameron is talking about, the equity of this. Is it fair to do this? Does it make sense to change the rules? I have two thoughts on that. Number one, as I said, I never would have been voted on excluding the infrastructure if I thought this was going to be this as an issue. I just thought it wasn't worth debating it because it seemed like the numbers were so far beyond that. I just trying to understand what the legislature was getting at. They picked the number 500 million. It had some reason for it, and to exclude infrastructure investment in a highway that's outside the gaming establishment, there's just no, that just doesn't make any, I can't see any reason why you would do that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So I would pull that one back in. This is not, we can talk about the apparent resistance to the idea within Region C. That's worth talking about because there is equity issues there. There are equity issues there. I don't think there are equity issues relative to the other two. If anything, I think probably the competitors, the less investment there is, the happier they'll be because there's going to be less competition for their facilities.
Yes.
The less robust facility this is, the less competition it'll be for the 8 regions A
Or
and B.
if we're changing this, we're incentivizing where maybe there wouldn't be competition at all if we kept the rules the way they are.
Well, let me just mention
Look at that
that.
both ways.
Let me mention one thing. Nobody is precluding anybody else from regions A and B to request a waiver at this point or in the near future. To say, based on, if I knew that I didn't want, I could have included interest costs for capitalization, I now want a waiver. They could do that conceivably. But I think that fundamentally everybody is above, and that's a very important point that you make, Mr. Chairman, which is the other regions will likely benefit from a lesser overall total investment amount in that region, Region C.
But let's just go back for a minute to, before we raise the specter now of waivers in regions A and B. I recognize that this first one was the one that provoked the most debate, but at the same time, the idea was, as I recall it, that if out of the 500 million, you took, say, 100 million, obviously using a big number, but I think we did talk in those terms, to build the bridge that you needed to get to the facility, you were going to wind up with a $400 million facility with a nice bridge. But bridges don't attract people, and therefore, the feeling was, I think, that ultimately carried the day, was that we shouldn't incentivize putting that kind of money into a bridge as opposed to the ground. So it seems to me that that still holds true, and to the extent that you're going to put money in infrastructure, you're not going to put it in the facility that's going to attract people. When we raise the specter of waivers now in regions A and B, we are talking about potentially upsetting and changing a whole set of rules that has affected the host community agreements, the surrounding community agreements, the mitigation, and people have played all of that out against the notion that you can't include these infrastructure costs in your overall expenditure. So anyway, I think we need to put that to one side. But that was the original basis, as I recall it, for excluding these things. And I still think though I can understand that it is a much closer call, I still think that holds water. A nice bridge is not going to bring people. A nice casino will.
You know, we're in this weird business we're always in of weighing imponderables, but again, trying to figure out what was the legislature wanting us to do at this stage of the game. If the trade-off is between having a robust competition or potentially any bidders, but somewhere between any bidders and robust competition, if that on the one hand versus a pulling money out of the amenities because you can count money for the bridge, where would they have us come down? And they gave us this option. For sure, they understood that we could have this debate. They invited us to have this debate. So they were clearly, on either side. But on the whole, it seems to me, and we've certainly construed our business this way. On the whole, first priority has been the integrity of the process. Second priority has been robust competition. And that's what's driven our work to a very large extent. That's why we're so, flexible, trying to give people the benefit of the doubt on breaks when there's problems and so forth. And I think that's the right thing to do, notwithstanding the delays. So, weighing these, relative things, it seems to me that probably the better case, and it's like a 55-45 case, but the better case, if it might very well increase the competition for the license, is probably to include the first category. For me, the other three are a stretch. I would probably kind of technically agree with Commissioner Stebbins, but I think the money's so small that it's not really worth worrying about.
The other piece of this that I think about, though, is it wasn't contemplated there'd be a fourth casino, and we're using that language now like that's an inevitability. And, what's the exact language if we thought that there was little chance or no chance to get the land in trust? So there's still the original intent here, and I understand why we opened this, because there was so much concern about the region, and we're trying to be fair to everybody, but I don't know.
Explain to me, what is your point? I'm not quite sure what your point.
The reason we opened the region, that was not contemplated, right? That was that region was set aside for the tribe, and then.
No, it wasn't set aside for the
Well,
tribe.
all right, not set aside, that's
I mean,
not
the
a good word to
legislature's-
use.
Legislature saw the same problem we did, which is this conundrum. And
Right,
There was
okay.
this kind of window that sort of gave the tribe a head start. That's
Right.
what there was.
Yes, I would agree with that, but, now the idea of zero, when and if they open the facility, and now we're looking to change some of these regulations because people are concerned about that inevitability and and the whole idea of saturation.
I'm just for the record, I'm not assuming a fourth casino at all. I mean, we're going to get to Region C decision-making in due time, which is going to be really complicated. What I think Commissioner Zuniga's characterization, what the bidders are going through now is the same thing we're going through.
Right.
They don't know what's going to happen. And how much money can they afford to put up, realizing there could be a fourth casino, but they don't know what's going to happen any more than
Right.
we do. And that would blow them out of the water. How much money can they afford to put up? And, on the one hand, they really want to play, they really want to invest, and the Foxwoods has an investment to protect and so on and so forth, on the one hand, but on the other hand, they're rational people, and they want to pull their exposure down as low as they possibly can as they walk into these murky waters. And I'm sympathetic to that.
I'm sympathetic to it too, and it is a difficult situation, but we do have one who's willing to play, as I said, it's willing to play by the existing rules. Secondly,
But that's,
I'm not convinced of that,
I'm not
Mr.
either.
Commissioner.
I mean, yes, we do have somebody has said that.
That's what they've said. That's what they've said. I mean,
We have a
can't-
comment from the city, Commissioner. I don't believe we've received a direct comment from the applicant.
There's
All
not, right, we've not, I mean, I think that's very telltale. We've heard words from the city. We haven't heard a word from the applicant.
Okay.
It's just
You know,
the fact that
actually-
The city made comments that in conversations with the applicant, in their latest comments in today's packet, voicing opposition to the minimum capital investment reduction, but there was no direct comment from the applicant there.
Okay.
Can I also say something on that note?
I interrupted Commissioner
Go
McHugh.
ahead.
Do you
No,
want to
go
finish?
ahead. Go ahead.
The further you are, the closer you are to Taunton in that region,
To the what?
to Taunton, to
Yeah.
the center, to the geographical center in that region, the more feasible that license is, because it's closer to the Boston suburbs. The farther away you are, the closer you are to the sea, the less potential market that you have. So my guess is that it may be a matter of time before we hear from the other proponents closer to in Fall River and New Bedford for a waiver request.
Okay, but, so that really gets back at the heart of my concern here, and that is that, and I said this already once, but why not repeat it?
Say it again.
Say it again.
We've got all day.
The basic thrust of this was not to have 3 casinos. It was to have 3 destination
Up to 3,
casinos, right? That would bring in money from out of state and bring, as I think, new money into the state. Because that's how you avoid the cannibalization, that's how you create the new jobs, that's how you create the new revenues for the state, that's how you grow the economy, not by shifting money around within the state. And so that, for me, is the pole star. What is going to be the impact of lowering the capital, the components of the capital investment on our ability to deliver that to the Commonwealth? And I fear that lowering the capital investment, even with the inclusion of something that might, under most circumstances, be logical to include, like infrastructure, external infrastructure costs, does that particularly in a region that needs a lot of pop to get people to come there. Of all regions, that's perhaps the region that needs the most pop, really, to make these things a success in bringing in new money rather than drawing on people who are already there. So that's thought number 1. Thought number 2 is that if we do this, if we change the rules now in order to increase competition, then really, to be faithful to that objective, we ought to reopen the bidding with the new rules, because we don't know who's been excluded because they didn't want to come in and contribute $500 million with these exclusions. If they have these exclusions, they may well, others may well come in and say, we're willing to play because that makes economic sense where the old rules didn't. So I think we need to think seriously about that if we change the rules now.
We're also going to talk today about the schedule for the application date for Region C, whether it should be extended, whether it stays where it is. I'm less inclined to think about offering a waiver on this minimum capital investment question until we actually see what the playing field looks like. And really, we don't have a firm idea as to what that looks like until we actually set a deadline, tell people when their applications have to be in. To grant the waiver prior to the application deadline and see what the competition looks like, I think would be somewhat doing a disservice to Region C.
You mean that you would let people put in their applications under this set of rules, and then if there weren't enough applications, go back and change the rules then and invite more applications?
If we set a deadline and there are 2 out of 3 players or whatever the mix is that says we can meet the $500 million requirement, I'll make the deadline, whatever we decide to set it as. I'd rather go through with that process first, and if nobody comes to the table, then we revisit.
What if one comes to the table?
One comes to the table.
All right, so you're...
I'm for there are going to be several steps, I think, along the way in evaluating some of these applications as to whether their $800 million project is better than anything else we could get. But changing the rules before we have and I agree with Commissioner Cameron to a point that I think I understand the analysis of the region. I do think it's somewhat unfair to the 2 that have already been going through the process at this point. But to offer a waiver prior to even hitting our application deadline, whenever that's going to be, I don't think I'm in favor of waiving the requirement of the $500 million investment at this point.
No.
I think that's exactly backwards. I think if we're going to consider a waiver, it should be before the applications come in. Having said that, I think we might not get an application on this region under the current definition of the
We might
capital
not get
investment.
under any any definition.
Under any definition,
Particularly
first of
under
all.
this definition.
But I think the one applicant that has really looked at the numbers is the one requesting this waiver. And to the point prior made by Commissioner McHugh and Commissioner Cameron as well, the idea was to get this region not behind. And I think we, as I try to articulate here, perhaps unsuccessfully, the potential on revenues for this region is the one comparatively less to the other two regions. And that is what drives capital investment, the potential market. So it's not me saying it, it's our consultants who quantify this market for us. Now, can everybody in Massachusetts drive in different directions to get to a casino? Sure. Will they drive one time an hour and a half and another an hour? That's also possible. But the market potential here is the one comparatively less. So if we were to do any kind of waivers, this one is the region to do it. And this one was the applicant that asked us for it. So in my view, it makes sense. So.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, one suggestion is, previously I asked if the commission wants to hear directly from the applicants that have a point of view on this. And I think that we thought that it probably made a lot of sense for us to do all of our reviews before, or as an alternative to that. But I was wondering if that might be a good suggestion. Because we at least have one full applicant considering Fall River. They have voiced that they will move forward with that application. We have at least one other in New Bedford, and they have not indicated any opposition to the minimum capital investment requirement reduction. And obviously, we have one that is pushing for a change to the requirement. I don't know if that would help with the commission's deliberations.
Yeah. Well, and let's see how we do here. I mean, that maybe I'd hate to put it off, but if we have to, we have to. But I think we got to try to, acknowledge all of the facts. The reality on the ground. I mean, KG Urban has been at this for years, and they have not been able to get a deal.
Get an operator, yep.
They can't get an operator. And they made a big point a year or more ago about saying to us in writing, we don't care anything about the tribal casino, it's not gonna be a problem, we're gonna be there. And a year and a half later, whatever it is, they haven't been able to get a deal. The folks who say that, who sort of, Foxwoods hasn't said a word to us, that I know of anyway, they've made no formal statement about this issue. If they had a strong feeling about either one of these issues, they surely would have said so. And we do know from our past experience they didn't have a financial deal put together for Milford. They didn't have a deal for Milford, and they've been working on it for God knows how long. So the fact that they, A, they didn't have a deal for Milford, and B, they haven't said a word, and I would not hold them out as a model of evidence that this number as it presently stands is doable. I just don't think that makes any sense given what we know. And the other outfit, who have been working on it for a long time, are Foursquare and saying. So, I mean, and then there are these numbers. I mean, these are facts. It's a pretty reasonable bet that the upside potential here is 370 million gross gaming revenue, which is 75% of Springfield and 50% of Boston. So you put all that together, and I think we are. If we don't mind running the risk of not having any bidders, then that's a perfectly reasonable way to go, and that'll solve our problem for us. And that's one way to solve this problem. But if we really want bids to maximize our opportunity, then I think this is a pretty small compromise. I don't quite agree with your characterization, Commissioner, that what's driving this is money from outside the state. Clearly, that is high-impact money, and we want that. But nobody is doing projections where money from outside the state is driving this. It's money inside the state that's driving it. And repatriating, I mean, if we have a $400,000 facility and a $100,000 bridge in Fall River or New Bedford or Bridgewater, that is going to repatriate probably $100 million gross gaming revenue, whatever it is, just so you're gonna get that for sure, which is the low-hanging fruit.
Well, I think the in-state money is the low-hanging fruit. I think in all of the applications we've gotten thus far, to one degree or another, there's been an emphasis on bringing in out-of-state money. And the out-of-state money has played a significant role in the projections that, albeit in a range, that we've gotten from each of the Category 1 applicants. So it is a big chunk. Although repatriation, I fully agree, is another important part.
But I would,
Can we come back to suppose we didn't, we're assuming that the reason that nobody can do this with these exclusions under these rules has to do with the rules rather than other considerations. And I'm not certain that that's the case. You pointed out that Foxwoods didn't have a deal in Milford, right? They didn't have a deal in Milford. That wasn't in Region C. That was in Milford. There are a number of things going on in New Bedford one could infer in addition to just a number of things going on in New Bedford. What would be wrong with leaving the application deadline where it is, seeing what happens, and if we don't get a bid, then revisiting this issue, and opening it up to everybody. That's consistent with my view that if we change the rules, we have to do that anyway. I know that doesn't have unanimous support, I can tell from the body language, but we can talk about that. But that would be a way to test, really, whether we are speculating on things that aren't going to happen, or whether that's a reality. And if so, talk to the potential applicants, find out why they didn't do it, and see what we need to do to get some competition.
well, I don't think there's anything wrong. I think that's a perfectly legitimate alternative. I think that would further extend the deadline, needless to say.
There's no question.
We would go back to, the goal of trying not to leave that region too far behind.
Right, I know.
So there would be an immediate reset by which we would now need to, we wouldn't be talking about, yeah, it would be at least a year, I don't know, hopefully less, but who knows?
Right. No, I think that's fair. I think it's a fair projection and a fair reason not to do it, but again, it's a balancing.
Let me mention something that I put in the memo that we haven't talked about, which is the Mashpee do not have a minimum capital investment requirement as per the compact. So that is another competitive disadvantage for a commercial bidder. And if we are thinking of these in the abstract of regions, that could also leave that region behind significantly, or for the reasons that we're talking about, attracting money out of state and et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that's baked into the risk analysis that ultimately the commercial bidders have to make. It's only them who can make this analysis. But I think that's an important data point that I thought was going to be persuasive enough to consider some of these waivers.
Not to sound like I'm trying to blow up my previous statement, but
Oh, it's
To-
great.
to-
I mean,
to-
somebody
to-
changes their mind. It's
well, no, I
fabulous.
mean, dangerous to brainstorm, but what if we proceeded with Region C and said, there is a waiver of the 500 million in terms of your project?
Just to be clear, I know we're not waiving the 500 million.
Yes.
We're redefining what's in the 500 million.
Redefining.
So just,
Okay.
so nobody is.
Redefining the 500 million. You're still going to have host communities who are going to decide if that's worthy of worthy of a project to put forward in their community. They may demand more, they may say that project doesn't fit with our community's plans. I think at the end of the day, when the applications all come to us, we will certainly, we're looking, I think, to Commissioner McHugh's point, we're looking for a project that has pop, we're looking for a project that has the strongest economic impact on the region in terms of construction jobs, in terms of permanent employment, and a lot of that could wind up being reflected in how somebody calculates their 500 million. So,
Right.
that's the other extreme.
Well, it sort of lets the market respond, you know, if we do redefine it, you know, we are in effect sort of giving more confidence to the market to tell us what it can do, you know, and they'll be, if, part of the reason the other bidders went up is because they were competing with one another. We saw what happened in Western Mass, the numbers kept going up. So, I mean, I guess I've said this, I mean, I never thought that we should have done this in the first place relative to that first factor, relative to infrastructure. And fixing that in the region, which is the smallest under any set of circumstances by a lot, and the most competitively intense, and has this overhang of the tribal casino. Fixing that one problem seems to me to be a relatively modest issue. And then the market takes over. And if nobody bids, nobody bids. That's life. But if a couple have materialized, they're going to be competing with the other because they're going to see exactly what you're saying. You know, we're going to like the one that has the better hotel and the more investment and the more money in. So, and if the market can't sustain that, it won't sustain that, and we'll do what we got to do. So I would like that approach. Well, does anyone think, Ombudsman Ziemba said we could kick the can down the road for 2 more weeks or some period of time and invite people to talk further about it. Does anybody feel that is something we ought to do?
No, I for one think we shouldn't.
Yeah,
I think we should just decide this and move on.
yeah. I think we know, I don't think there's anything to be learned, really. Maybe we could probe Foxwoods, but I think Foxwoods' silence has spoken pretty clearly to me on this one. Anybody disagree with that?
No, I think might as well. You know, we always have options of further extensions later on or further rebidding.
Yeah, we can always reconsider this. Do you want to?
I don't know if
stab at a motion?
Yes, I will. I don't know if it'll pass, but I would move that this commission redefine the infrastructure costs in its regulations as it pertains to inclusion in the minimum capital investment calculation, and include all infrastructure costs inside and outside the property boundary for that calculation.
So, I'm
How
sorry.
do we define infrastructure?
So you're talking about,
Infrastructure costs.
your first.
My first one,
First
yes.
item, right.
Right. I suspect the other 3 may or may not.
Yeah, no,
We
I'd
have-
stick with this one. yeah.
From.
If we're going to open it up, would you include building and any local fees for
Yes, sure.
construction?
Right.
Again, it's not a big dollar amount, but throw it in.
But that's fine. And include all necessary and obligatory permit fees, locally and state.
And it's the phrase is the same phrase which is in the statute, infrastructure designed to support the site.
Yes.
That's what you're referring.
That's right.
Which falls outside the property boundaries of the premises of the gaming establishment.
That's right.
Is there any more definition than that you were thinking about?
No, I was thinking of simply deleting, so that we raise the least ambiguity to the regulations, our existing regulations, and maybe we don't, just eliminating number 4. In other words, the motion would simply waive 122.04.4 for
Okay.
Regency.
Okay. That's a lot cleaner.
You want to reframe that?
Sure. 12204 sub 4.
122.04 parent 4, closed parent.
Would be
Then I would move that this,
Waive that for
Yes.
Region C.
right,
waive that exclusion.
Yes.
Waive that exclusion for Region
Okay.
C.
then I would move that that for region, as it pertains to Region C, this commission waive the present regulation 12204, subsection 4, when it comes to the minimum investment calculation.
Second? Can I second?
Sure.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
So out loud, that was Commissioner Stebbins,
Yep.
and Commissioner Zuniga, and Commissioners Crosby said aye, and the nays,
Nay.
Nay.
Commissioner Cameron and Commissioner McHugh. So the ayes have it. I don't think it's worth going, trying any others, right?
Well, if you think so, probably not.
I would join the other guys on the other ones.
On the nays?
Yeah. on
Yeah,
the other
then
three.
I think
Yeah. Right,
that's it for now.
okay. All right, what else you got? If anybody thinks this stuff is predetermined, man, you can sure see it isn't. I thought this one was a no-brainer.
I thought you were easy, too.
Maybe it was.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, now we turn to the Region C discussion relative to the timetable, the application date. I'm not going to repeat all the conversations that the commission has had over the last couple of meetings. However, as a reminder, we've modeled 3 different dates for the application deadline. November 17th with an estimated award date of April 1st, 2015. October 17th with an estimated award date of March 2nd, 2015. And September 23rd with an estimated award date of February 9th. These award dates assume that there will be at least one surrounding community or ILEV dispute, impacted live entertainment venue dispute, that will take the maximum allowable under our regulations. The dates assume that the commission will be able to determine the suitability for any new qualifiers by August, before the referendum dates permissible under these application dates. Since the last meeting, we've received comments from the City of Fall River and the City of Fall River's Office of Economic Development asking that the commission do not further extend the deadline past the earliest deadline of September 23rd of this year. As of last evening, at least the last I checked, we had not received any further comments. In regard to the 3 options, I don't believe it's possible to predict with certainty the consequences or benefits associated with each. The earliest date could lead to less development applications than the latest date. The latest date and the middle date could result in an award date that is later. However, there's not necessarily a definitive correlation between the award date and when the facilities will be ready to open, as substantial permitting will be necessary after the award date under all 3 of these application dates. If the past is any indication, we may not have the benefit of a DEIR certificate, draft environmental impact certificate, when we are reviewing the Region C applications, given that other Category 1 applications have taken over a year or years from the time of announcement for the DEIR certificate. In all fairness, in my meetings with the City of Fall River indicated that they fully expect that even with the July 23rd deadline, that they would be able to achieve a DEIR certificate. However, just looking at the chart that's included in your packets, it has taken substantially longer in other instances. There's also uncertainty regarding our ability to review the backgrounds of all qualifiers, as we do not yet know who they are. Finally, we don't know how the conversations with surrounding communities will progress, as they have not yet been initiated, to the best of my knowledge. As we know, regardless of whatever our application deadline is, a dispute with surrounding communities may lead to substantial delays in the eventual award dates. With any of these dates, the commission may want to explore options to give everyone more predictability on surrounding community impacts before the application deadline. For example, perhaps the commission could require, rather than recommend, an independent peer review or other review of traffic impacts before the application deadline. Such a review could allow communities to better understand impacts and could potentially lessen the risk that unfounded fears about traffic resulting from each of these facilities would lead to more lengthy surrounding community disputes after the application. I just wanted to note that with each one of these application deadlines, obviously we need to back out 60 to 90 days before those application deadlines and an additional 10 days for certification periods. So even though the deadlines of September, October, or November may appear quite far away at this point, if you back out those 60 to 90 days plus the additional 10, they're a little bit closer than where we are today. But unfortunately, I don't have more certainty for you, but where we are in this stage of the process, I think that there's rather substantial uncertainty in a lot of different factors.
So the only opposition is Fall River, right? And they claimed in their first round of letters that they would have a host community agreement by April 3rd and a referendum in early June. That didn't happen, and they're now saying they would, in their most recent letters, they said they would have a host community agreement by early April and an election in June, and it's now April 17th, so that hasn't happened. So I'm not sure of that confidence I have of their sense of the schedule. Plus, their partner has a big background check. You're here, I assume, to give a sense of what's realistic about background checks. Do you want to come up here and?
Well, Director Wells gets to that. Do they have an ENF certificate filed?
No.
Nobody has, right?
No, not to the best of my knowledge. But again, that is probably the one of the easiest of the application requirements if you wanted to meet the minimum. We've always recommended that all applicants try to achieve well beyond the minimum of the ENF certificate.
But nobody has filed anyway.
Correct. I think the project is still in development while they're working on the host community agreement.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what I indicated at our last meeting, that the, while we continue to have discussions with potential applicants, the IEB is yet to receive a complete picture of any deal for Region C. So therefore, it's impossible for me to ascertain when would be a realistic date that I could complete the suitability investigation. I can guess as long as parties get their materials in the next few weeks. But as we know from prior experience, that doesn't always happen, and things come up and schedules slip. So I just do not want the IEB to be in the position, for example, we were with one of the applicants for Region A, where we're at the last minute and I have to report that I don't have a complete application. I could not complete the investigation. So that would be my concern. And as of right now, with a significant entity and a significant number of qualifiers, a minimum of 4 months, the more weeks that pass by and we don't have the full picture, the more difficult it's going to be for us to match up any deadline. So I would suggest the IEB should not be held to a deadline, but rather have an estimate of when things can be completed.
You get the sense that us setting a date will kind of back that timeline out for an applicant?
Well, we discussed this at the, when we were going through this with the other two regions. It's, you could set a date where you have, say, for example, all your qualifiers in and your deal together, but the very nature of this business is that qualifiers are going to come in and out. So it's somewhat of a moving target, and there are inevitably going to be some changes, with any business organization, not just within gaming. So that's what makes it difficult here. And it's.
Well, and we don't know yet. We think we have a number of applicants. A number of people who have indicated interest who could be applicants, but there are a few others out there still, right? And this is sort of like a pillow fight in a dark room. You can't, you don't know where the next piece is coming from.
It's more like a baseball bat fight in a dark room.
Is there some is there some way, is there something to be said for not deciding this issue now, but for canvassing the known applicants as to the impact of what we just did with respect to the capital requirements on their ability to put a deal together, and how long that's going to take before we make a deadline. I think that setting non-functional deadlines always risks being ineffective, because the deadline just won't work. And I would much rather, if it were possible to do so, have a functional deadline that was based on an expectation that it was doable and would but at the same time would make people move forward.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
So you think there's information to be gleaned from that canvassing at this stage of the game, that this change was enough that the lay of the land will crystallize?
We need to find out if we have more than one applicant. It would be interesting to know for the commission in setting deadlines.
So if we've said it's going to be no earlier than September, and if that leaves Region A no time. So like Region A people, the loser in Region A couldn't re-gear. They're out of it if it's September.
Right.
Tough to make November, too.
But we don't have to wait until September. I mean,
No.
my view would be to see if we
do it
could,
soon, yeah.
within a couple of weeks or a month at the outside, see if this makes a difference, and then it's likely, well, I can't project, makes a difference, and then take action based on that, and on the desirability, if there is one, to allow the Region A player to get in if they want it.
Yeah, except for the Region A. For Region A to get in, we'd have to put it off probably till next year, basically, into January, probably. Enough time for Region A player, because that decision doesn't get made until early to mid-August.
Right.
And they'd need at least, 90 days to, to get going. So, but except for that one, I don't know whether time is going to make any difference here. I don't know how much difference this one's going to make. Maybe the change we made will at least crystallize one deal. I don't know. We'll soon find out. But I'm not sure how much difference time is going to make. I'm afraid that it's not time that's the problem. It's the marketplace that's the problem. But I guess there's no harm in waiting. The harm in waiting is there's no certainty for people. Is that a bad thing? I guess that's.
No, well, that's the certainty of the moment is September 23rd.
Yeah. Right.
Right?
Right.
And so doing nothing doesn't create a vacuum. It leaves in place a deadline that's really going to be difficult for anybody to meet, but it allows us
To find out what's going on.
what's going on, and then change it in a functional way, if necessary.
Another thought came to mind, which, the statute originally contemplated one application deadline. We would turn over the application to the IEB, which would conduct its investigation, and then upon that completion, turn back to the Commission for the analysis and evaluation of the technical proposal. We bifurcated it into two phases, obviously, and one already is passed. The phase one, and now obviously we're talking about phase two.
A piece of phase one
A piece of phase one, right,
for each one.
right. I guess I was thinking perhaps we could collapse those two phases into one as early as September the 27th, and allow a determination of completeness relative to investigatory materials, and then see what happens after. But
Oh, in other words, say that you have to have your complete deal into us by the now existing deadline and extend the RFA
Two.
2 deadline
that's right,
down the road. That's interesting.
right.
Oh, I didn't understand that. So make September the RFA 1?
Or another date, but really,
That's reopening it to new applicants, you mean?
we could or don't have to.
Yeah.
And I know it gets tricky with the number of qualifiers that come in and out and et cetera, but instead of focusing on RFA 2 deadline, really focusing on RFA 1, which is, do you have all your parties? We have to get the investigation done first and foremost, and then see where we are then.
That's really interesting. The RFA 1
It's a hard deadline.
is a hard deadline, and then there's a sub-question there as to whether it's new applicants or just putting the full deal together for the existing applicants. And then setting the RFA 2 deadline down the road,
Right.
slightly to give the IEB a chance.
And if you're not complete in the eyes of the IEB after that deadline, that hard deadline, then
You're done.
you're done.
And that's, so we're talking September?
Well, it
So
could
that's-
really be any deadline. It could be as late
May,
as
June, July.
later
Would
if we
be,
think so, or as earlier. if
4.5
we thought so.
months.
Well, I mean, I guess we might as well go with getting a little more information, right? We might as well see if we can get anything that gives us any help here.
Yes, but
Let's see.
but that, if we did that, but I think this is an intriguing idea, because
I'm getting some success here.
Unlike the waiver.
Unlike the
which was a
waiver.
really lousy idea.
One win, one loss.
We've moved on, put it behind you.
No, because that would give people now, this is as much as we're gonna do on the waiver.
Yes.
Right? I still favor opening it up, but we don't have to decide that today. If we took in principle your idea, then we would give people, after we get a little time, a little more information, a deadline by which now you gotta put your deal together. This is all you're gonna get. And
No more placeholders, in other words.
Right.
You have to have all your parties,
right,
or whoever you think are gonna be.
Right.
There has to be a legitimate time for investigation, and we can only see.
right.
There's
Who and how
there's a
much
little bit of
time?
a definitional problem there, because, what comprises a complete deal? As we said, they change, what happens if they,
Well,
One
direct,
Be substantially
But
complete.
they have to have an operator, right? I mean, that's it. And
that
it
would
can't be some guy they just drag out of the woods. I mean, it's gotta be an operator.
they have to have their financing fundamentally, at least,
And a finance.
financing plan. Not entirely the financing
And that's
available.
not a huge cost for them to assume as compared to the RFA 2 process, which is a more costly process for them to engage in with all the market scenarios.
but you're talking about doing this after we get our
Yeah.
research. So why don't we, let's move on. So we're gonna add this to our May 1st and no doubt 2nd agenda, it looks like. So.
It'll be a long day.
So we'll try to do some research and see what, and I guess you can sort of characterize this as we're getting down to,
Yeah.
time,
time.
it's
Yeah.
crunch time, thank you, I was trying to find an elegant way to say it. Yeah, crunch time. So it's time for people to start to put up or shut up, because we have to start putting in some deadlines here that we really stick with. So if you can probe, that would be helpful. Okay, what else you got?
Great.
Thank you, Director Wells.
One of 3 regions down. Now let's move to Region B.
Okay.
MGM is asked to address the commission about issues relating to the timing and method of the award of the Region B licenses and the payment of fees. They'd like to provide their perspective on the impacts of the potential ballot initiative and SJC proceedings regarding the ballot initiative. As MGM understands that the commission is in the midst of its reviews of its applications, MGM is not expecting that the commission will address its comments and concerns during today's meeting. Instead, MGM asked to directly address the commission now, as some of these issues are part of the conversations the commission will be having in the days and weeks ahead. With that, I see we're joined by MGM, Mr. Mathis and his team. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good almost afternoon, Chairman Crosby, members of the commission. Jed Nosel from the law firm of Brown Rudnick. I'm joined here with Marty Nasasia and Michael Mathis, the president of MGM Springfield. We appreciate the commission's time today in allowing us to appear on the agenda to discuss the timing and structure of an award of license and payment of fees. Before we begin, I do want to thank certainly your staff, specifically General Counsel Blue and Ombudsman Ziemba for their time and ongoing accessibility and willing to discuss concerns and certainly steer us in the direction of where we need to be in bringing these to the Commission's attention. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Mathis, and he'll present to the Commission.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you for allowing me to appear today. Yesterday, I sent you a detailed letter outlining MGM's request and offer to bridge what we think may be a 2 to 3 week period of uncertainty between the Commission's selection of the winner of the Western Mass Category 1 license and what we hope and expect will be a dismissal by the Supreme Judicial Court of the effort to repeal the Massachusetts Gaming Act, which was signed by Governor Patrick in November of 2011. The Commission's current schedule provides for a May 30th award of that license. As you know, MGM, along with the towns of West Springfield and Long Meadow, recently, and I want to say jointly, which has not been the case with some of those communities, asked the Commission for what is tantamount to a 2-week extension of that selection in order for us to allow us to finalize our surrounding community agreements through arbitration. I'm pleased to report that the first of those hearings is to commence and to be completed by tomorrow, and the other will be completed by early next week.
Great.
The arbitrators in those proceedings have committed to provide a final decision on both of those matters by April 30th. Accordingly, we believe a mid-June licensee selection is very obtainable. With these last 2 surrounding community agreements resolved and the subsequent statutory closing of our final host community hearing in Springfield. We recognize the economic and budgetary benefit to the Commonwealth from an award of the Category 1 license for Western Massachusetts and the receipt of the $85 million licensing fee by the end of this June 30 fiscal year. To make that possible, MGM is requesting that the Commission consider a 2-step process in the award of the license. First, a selection or determination of the Commission's selection for the license. As the sole remaining bidder for that license in Region B, I hope you won't think us too presumptuous to suggest that MGM Springfield received that determination. I would also suggest that being the last bidder standing in this region is no accident. Respectfully, we believe that MGM Resorts is the best company with the best project in the best city and site in Western Mass for this opportunity. Having spent time with our company and recently time in Springfield seeing our vision, I hope you will all agree. We believe that the law is working as it should. A handful of communities have voted to approve a gaming casino facility in their community, and a handful of communities have rejected it. We believe that was what was intended by the Gaming Act. Accordingly, such a selection or determination would allow MGM and the Commission to negotiate the form of award and related conditions in advance of what would be the formal award of the license, which we are proposing would only be conditioned on 2 events. The earlier of the dismissal of the repeal petition by the SJC, or the rejection by the voters if eventually part of a referendum. MGM is offering, under such a bifurcated process, to waive our statutory right to 30 days to make payment of our various licensing fees, including the $85 million fee, and instead to make such a payment within 5 business days of a formal award. Further, we have committed to try and further expedite those payments in the event the SJC dismisses the petition in June and we are somehow able to make that payment in this fiscal year. We are more than happy to make those concessions and provide flexibility in what constitutes and what continues to be an evolving and complex process. We have also offered to advance what would be our proportionate share of operating costs of the commission through the end of this calendar year. We are estimating that amount to be approximately $2.7 million, and we have offered to make that payment following our selection, which would be the first phase of this bifurcated process, in advance of our formal award. I also want to acknowledge and thank the Commission for the flexibility you have all shown throughout this process, specifically the latest revised regulations you've passed to provide you the tools to accommodate some of the elements of this request. In closing, I would be remiss not to mention some of the opportunities that are on hold while this process is under this cloud of doubt. The licensing fees and payments to the Commission are certainly important, but we also have committed in our host community agreement to make millions of dollars of prepayments during the development period to fund such causes as early education and public safety once we can start construction. But it really goes beyond dollars. Shovels in the ground means 2,000 badly needed construction jobs and what will be the largest development project in Western Massachusetts. And that is why the Carpenters Union joined us yesterday at the SJC with their own filing opposing the repeal petition. Similarly, our project means joint marketing partnerships with the MCCA, who manages this building, and the Mass Mutual Center in Springfield. They, along with the affiliated Chamber of Commerce of Springfield and the Greater Springfield Convention and Visitors Bureau, also filed papers with the court yesterday on behalf of their impacted members. We were also pleased to have the Massachusetts Competitive Partnership, who represents some of the Commonwealth's top business leaders, file with the court as well. Thank you for taking the time this morning to let us explain our proposal, and we look forward to getting your feedback and thoughts. I'm happy to answer any of the questions that was in our detailed letter yesterday, but I think it largely speaks for itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mathis. Any questions or?
No, I have no questions. The letter is in the packet, I believe, and,
Yep.
and it is detailed and comprehensive.
Excuse me, did you, Commissioner?
Well, I'm going to make a point that I think Mr. Mathis highlighted in the letter, but didn't mention now that I feel is very important. He's focusing on the payment of the fee, which is the thing that happens first, which is substantial, and there's risk, etc. And then a lot of costs that come soon thereafter because of obligations that you have locally and etc. But something that really resonated with me is what you described. If demolition started, if construction started in the city as you plan it, and the repeal happened, it would be, in my opinion, devastating for the city of Springfield. It would forget about one tornado or one gas explosion. It would probably look like 5 tornadoes. So there's a third party here that I hadn't thought of until you put in this letter with us. That eventually is very important in our consideration of the timeline and the things that are at play that we cannot control, which is the SJC first, and then an eventual potential referendum. So just wanted to mention that. I think that's especially something that resonates with me, and if we are going to decide this matter now, I'd be happy to talk more about later, but I think it's important to underscore.
In the inimitable language of another lawyer, I don't think we want to get the cart before the horse here, but I don't think we're going to make any decisions on this now. I mean, there is a process still to be done here, and everybody is assuming where we're going to go, and it's probably a reasonable assumption, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. But specifically, there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat, and you've acknowledged that we put in the regs to give us the flexibility. You mentioned in your answer to question 9, I forget exactly how you referred to it here, but there are certain things like your land acquisition costs and your HCA obligations and so forth. You know, there are maybe triggers that we don't know exactly what triggers what, and you said you knew we couldn't give you relief on these, but you'd like our help. But if we end up sitting down trying to work our way through this, I think we'll want to understand what all the issues are and do whatever we can to accommodate them. Whether this is the exact structure that we use remains to be seen, but this certainly is well within the range of what I think we were giving ourselves the tools to do.
Yeah, Chairman, I appreciate that comment, and really to sort of consistent with the earlier dialogue about Region C, if you think about what was the contemplation of the legislature, I think the award of the license was intended to be truly the kickoff to the project. And what we find ourselves in terms of the repeal effort is an award of a license that does not allow for the commencement of construction. So just to summarize some of, and you're absolutely right, there are triggers that are unique to our development that would be different for other organizations. But simply put, there's the $85 million fee. There is a development 10% deposit, which, depending on how you define it, we estimate between $50 and $60 million. And then in our case, there would be $45 million worth of closing costs on land. So you get close to a $200 million check that is triggered by an award of a license that is truly not an award of a license potentially. And that's all we're looking for relief on. We're ready to go. The minute that it is final and behind us, we've conceded that the commission and the Commonwealth shouldn't have to wait for 30 days because we know what that final condition will be.
Yeah.
So, but appreciate your consideration, and I know you're sympathetic to our situation.
Yeah. I did have one question. You were operating on the assumption of a FY15 budget of $14 million. Is that more or less right?
That maybe will, I
thought
won't
that
be
was-
here, but there's an update, well, no, we're that's in the ballpark.
It's close enough.
It's close, yeah.
Ballpark. Okay.
It's in the ballpark. But the budget will be coming later in the fiscal year, maybe towards the end of May.
But just for their planning purposes, if the number, if it was off by an order of magnitude of 2, that was real money. So, but I guess it's somewhere in this range. So their numbers are
Yes.
somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And whether the proportions are right and so forth, but it's somewhere in this area. Okay.
And to be clear, whatever the appropriate share
right,
based on the
okay.
budget and the pro rata, we're committing to.
Okay. Anything else for Mr. Mathis or MGM or this topic?
No, that was very helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks
for
very
coming
much.
in. All right.
Thank you.
Do I have to disclose that Mr. Nozel used to work for me?
You just did.
I just did, right. Sort of.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you want to proceed to Region A?
Yeah.
Great. First, let me just discuss a mutual request we have from Mohegan Sun and the town of Winthrop. This is located in tab D of 3. There's the Somerville Law Memorandum, Chelsea Memorandum, and then Mintz-Levin response. And then follows is the Winthrop request that I have that's included here. So the parties ask that the commission grant a variance to our arbitration regulations, requiring them to begin the arbitration process at the conclusion of the 30-day negotiation period, which ends on April 22nd. The town and the applicant request that they not be required to begin arbitration until May 1st. Thus, instead of spending time on finalizing arbitrations, arbitrators, and best and final offers, they can instead spend some additional time in the negotiations. Both parties agree with this proposal. The parties note that the extension will not directly impact the commission's timeline because of the pending proceedings regarding the City of Boston status. These additional 8 days could potentially lead to a surrounding community agreement much quicker and with significantly less contention and with much less expense in terms of time and resources that the arbitration process would allow. This request would work well within a proposal that Council Blue and I will explain a little bit later, providing applicants and communities a little bit more flexibility regarding arbitration deadlines as long as they are within a constrained period of time. Given these reasons, I recommend that the Commission grant the variance. We are joined by representatives of Mohegan Sun and the town of Winthrop if the Commission has any questions.
Questions?
So both parties are making the joint request for an extension.
They're making a joint request for the extension.
To avoid arbitration.
Yeah, and they are very hopeful and optimistic that they can proceed through in finalizing an agreement in the near term, but they do realize that there's still a potential for arbitration, but they're working toward that date.
From my standpoint, there's a two-part test here, and it was the case in MGM when we had it also considered an arbitration. One is that both parties are agreeing to the request, and two is that there's no consequential prejudice to some other party. And in this case, I think it passes both tests because this isn't going to be a delay because there's already been a delay, and both parties are applying. So from my standpoint, it's harmless and
Same
would
here.
actually be constructive.
Same here.
Yeah.
I agree as well.
Okay. Do we need a vote for that? Yes, I guess we do. Commissioner McHugh?
I move that the request of the two parties for an extension of the arbitration commencement deadline to April 30th, that's the date, be approved by the commission.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I think they asked for May 1st.
I'm sorry. All right, substitute May 1st for April 30th.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We also have two requests for extensions from the cities of Somerville and Chelsea. The city of Somerville asks for an extension of the period of negotiation or preparation for arbitration of 30 days or some other period deemed appropriate by the commission. The city of Chelsea asks for a similar extension to June 2nd, approximately a 40-day extension. Both cities reference the Boston proceedings as a reason for their petitions. Both requests are opposed by the WIN application team. I do note that parties are allowed and encouraged to continue negotiations even after the beginning of arbitration under our current regulations. However, I do note that once the arbitration procedures begin, that it potentially could be a little bit more difficult to reach a negotiated settlement, but we have always encouraged the parties to continue negotiations even in the event of arbitration. The city of Somerville has asked for an opportunity to address the commission. The city of Chelsea would like the commission to deliberate based on its written submission. With the commission's permission, I would ask that Mr. Frank Wright, city solicitor from Somerville, present the city's request for 5 to 10 minutes. Following Mr. Wright's presentation, Tony Starr from Mintz-Levin, representing WIN, would address Somerville's request. Before they begin, I would like to just commend both the city of Somerville and the WIN applicant for a very thoughtful dialogue on potential impacts. We do receive a lot of back and forth between the city and trying to understand true impacts and the WIN team submitting detailed responses to a lot of those concerns. So after the presentations and discussions of the Somerville petition, the commission could then discuss the Chelsea petition, which involves very, very similar concerns on both the city of Chelsea and the applicant team. So with your permission, Mr. Chairman, we could
Yep.
ask Mr. Wright to come join us.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Frank Wright, City Solicitor, City of Somerville. I'm accompanied by Jason Grossfield, Assistant City Solicitor. We appreciate the opportunity to be heard this afternoon with regards to this matter. Somerville has been working with WIN. We met as recently as yesterday afternoon to discuss this. I just wanted to give you a little bit of additional information beyond that, which is set forth in my letter and my motion. Just a little history. The parties first met to discuss the proposed WIN casino several months ago, going back till late summer, early fall. At that time, the city had requested that the WIN team recognize Somerville as a surrounding community. Despite Somerville's location across the river from the Mystic River from the proposed casino site, and the fact that Somerville is adjacent to and directly impacted by Sullivan Square Rotary intersection, as well as Wellington Circle, WIN cited their intention to await and review their studies before making a decision on whether Somerville was a surrounding community. The parties met several times thereafter, and during that time, WIN also rejected the city's request for funding with regards to retaining the MAPC to do independent studies. WIN awaited recognizing Somerville as a surrounding community until the deadline, which was an extended deadline set by this commission. Since that time, the parties have met and expressed their respective desire to reach an agreement with a surrounding community agreement, and expressed their need to gather additional information with regards to the impacts. On its own, the city has retained several consultants, including the Metropolitan Area Planning Council as the regional planning body, and worked with MIT as to the impacts of the proposed WIN casino on Somerville. The parties have continued to produce and exchange substantive information. As recently as this week, 4 reports were received and forwarded by Somerville to WIN. They related to economic impact, transportation, housing, and open space. We anticipate a public safety and air quality report, respectively, to be received and produced to WIN within the coming days, if not today. WIN's council also provided additional information to Somerville, substantive information, on Tuesday. So that information had been requested some time ago, but has now been received. And city officials and WIN reps met yesterday, and we've agreed to schedule additional meeting times. Now that the city has the MAPC studies and WIN has gathered the additional information, the parties are in a position to make a thoughtful, supported decision and proposal as to reaching a surrounding community agreement. Somerville is unaware of any other community in the Region A district that has undertaken the technical review, both through the MAPC, MIT, or otherwise, to determine the impacts of a casino, which has been universally recognized as going to have regional impacts. Considering WIN's decision not to recognize Somerville as a surrounding community until the deadline, it was unreasonable to allow the parties, it would be unreasonable, I'm sorry, to not allow the parties an additional 30 days at this point to reach a surrounding community agreement, considering the issues faced a densely settled community such as Somerville. While we can pursue a dual track we believe will not be as productive to the needs of the city and WIN. The city has limited resources to devote to this matter, and a 2-track system would strain those resources, to say the least. Additionally, we lose this weekend due to the Good Friday, Easter, and Patriots' Day weekend, so we will lose 4 days along that line because of scheduled family and religious observances that our consultants and employees have. Finally, as mentioned by Mr. Ziemba, there will be no prejudice to either the city, WIN, or this commission due to the pending motions filed by Boston. The decision with regards to awarding the Region A license will be held in abeyance pending those decisions, and the WIN decision or the Mohegan Sun decision will not in any way be delayed. Thank you.
Well, the only prejudice we'll hear from the wind interests, but so far as I know, the prejudice being suggested in the letter is the availability of the arbitrators and the costs that have been incurred. What, if anything, do you have to say about that?
Well, to some degree, I know that I didn't receive that letter until last night by email, so I just got a chance to look at it this morning. But I understand that apparently is the position they're taking. The schedule, due to a variety of reasons, has they've been shifting sands here. You've had to adjust the schedule throughout this process.
Right.
So I don't necessarily accept the possibility that the WIN team cannot adjust the schedule now, should it make sense. I would also say we may not have to go to arbitration.
Right.
Both sides have shown a serious interest in resolving this thing without having to get to arbitration. And I think because we just have the reports before us now, we're both analyzing them, we should be able to work this out, I would anticipate, if we get the time to do so. But to try to dual track this, I think would be difficult at best for the city.
Let me try one other thought. What about if you proceeded to arbitration on the schedule?
Which is what, remind me what the dates would be?
April 23rd.
Would be was in the end, April 23rd is the end of the negotiating 30 days and starts the arbitration
Yeah,
process.
April 22nd, the end of the negotiations, April 23rd, the beginning of the arbitration process.
But then jointly ask the arbitrator to hold the report to give you time after the arbitration to negotiate further with the commission's agreement.
Well, I mean, that's a possibility, I suppose, but as the city stands right now, we're still analyzing those reports. We would have to line up our consultants. WIN has, to some extent, an advantage to the extent that they did their studies ahead of time. I think Somerville, unlike any other community, as I stated, in Region A at least, if not statewide, has on its own gone out and retained the MAPC, engaged in individuals at MIT, as well as another consultant. And those reports are just getting back to us based on the fact that we didn't want to expend those monies when WIN rejected our request to go down that road until we were absolutely sure we were a surrounding community. Once we knew we were a surrounding community, we invested that money pursuant with the statute and pursuant to this commission's rules and regulations to address those matters which are supposed to be addressed when determining what the mitigation should be for a surrounding community.
Okay, thank you.
And did we make the decision that Somerville was a surrounding community? What was the date?
They were very shortly after the application period in the 10-day window for surrounding community petitions. WIN then designated the city of Somerville right before the petition deadline.
Which was when?
So that was around January 10th or 11th.
So Somerville became a surrounding community January 10th or 11th?
Approximately, yes. Is that correct, Solicitor?
It was around that time that they acknowledged our petition to this commission. You obviously made your decision sometime in March.
So, well,
But effectively, you knew you were you're going to be a surrounding community
Yes.
in January.
Yes, and that
Right,
was at that
formality
time
of it.
that
Yeah.
we pursued the consultants. I mean,
Right.
obviously, the consultants needed to study transportation, the economic impact, public safety, all those things
Right.
take time.
All right.
okay, any other questions for the general counsel?
Great. Thank you, we
Thank you
appreciate
very
the
much.
time.
Thank you very much.
If Mr. Starr from the WIN development team could join us.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Tony Starr from the law firm of Mintz-Levin, and I'm presenting for WIN today. I hope you have in your packets the correspondence that I sent over, I believe, on Tuesday with respect to Somerville and then Wednesday with respect to Chelsea. I want to start by making clear that Wynn, of course, concurs with Somerville, that Wynn and Somerville have been working very hard over the last several weeks and indeed months to try and come to a surrounding community agreement. And it continues to be Wynn's strong desire that a surrounding community agreement be reached consensually with Somerville. The Commission regulations establish a very well choreographed process for the surrounding community arbitration. There are multiple steps with clearly and well-defined time periods. The time periods are indeed tight, but they have been part of your rules and regulations for many months now, and they've been well known to all of the parties during that period of time. The applicants and the surrounding communities, of course, have had to plan for both eventualities. They've had to plan for reaching consensual surrounding community agreements, but they've also had to plan for the eventuality of an arbitration on a schedule that you published if those agreements couldn't be reached consensually. Wynn has been meeting with the surrounding communities since last summer, been doing briefings and providing information and so forth and making proposals. And indeed, as the Commission knows, surrounding community agreements have been reached with a number of the surrounding communities. Others are very close. A couple others might require arbitration. Time will tell on that.
Last summer doesn't have any relevance to this, though. You didn't recognize Somerville until January, I gather.
You're absolutely correct, Chairman, but meetings took place and information was provided. There was no prohibition against an applicant meeting with likely or potential surrounding communities early on the process to begin the education and exchange information, explain the plans and so forth. So you're absolutely right until a formal designation took place, and in this case, Somerville was January. But the meetings with Somerville began last summer. Indeed, the first week of December, the Wynn team met with the Somerville team and walked them through our draft environmental impact report, which I believe is part of what the Commission has, and it's several thousand pages long, and it's the most comprehensive information that Wynn had on traffic impacts and so forth. And Wynn, during the last week of December, at the same time as we delivered our final application to the Commission, we hand-delivered it to Somerville as well. So you are correct that they were not formally surrounding communities, but information exchange and meetings have occurred. The current schedule was set in early March. There were a couple of changes in February, but then you settled on a schedule the first week of March. And at that point, Wynn continued the negotiations, but also Wynn thoughtfully began to prepare for the arbitration should those negotiations not prove to be fruitful. You set a very, as I said, well-choreographed timetable that told me, as the attorney for Wynn, that I needed to start working on getting set for hearings, which would begin to take place after April 29th and must be concluded by May 18th or 19th. I had 20 days to get ready for. So naturally, we began the process of contacting likely witnesses and asking them respectfully, keep that 20-day period of time open. In the event we don't come to closure on surrounding community agreements, we will need your testimony. And we asked our witnesses not to schedule anything for that 20-day period. You could be as busy as you want after May 19th or before April 29th, but during that 20-day period, we asked them not to set any appointments. So they could be available depending on what schedule for hearings the arbitrators ultimately set. Likewise, we had to begin the process of determining who would be an appropriate neutral or arbitrator for this process. And we did just that. During the months of February and early March, we developed a list of potential neutrals who had the characteristics suggested by the arbitration regulations and the guide or handbook that you had published. We developed a list. We contacted those arbitrators, those potential neutrals, to conduct the mandatory interview to determine conflict and bias, again, suggested by your handbook. We did that. I did that. And then ultimately, when we had determined from that list who did not have any conflicts, who did not have any bias, we then had to go over availability with them. Certain potential arbitrators told me, I would like to do this, but I'm not available for those 20 days. These arbitrators book out 2 or 3 months in advance, but eventually we settled on several arbitrators who we felt met the criteria, keeping in mind we didn't know how many potential surrounding community arbitrations there could be, 3, 4, 5, or 6, we didn't know. Deposits were made so that we could reserve time on these arbitrators' schedules, and indeed, we've done that. In the case of one very well-respected neutral, I reserved 6 days on his schedule during that 20-day period, because if I waited until April 29th to start calling arbitrators to participate in that process, no arbitrators would be available. So at this point, it would be very difficult if the schedule was adjusted even by a matter of a couple of weeks. The arbitrators who we've spoken with have reserved that 20-day period for us, or some number of days in it, but they're booked in the weeks and months that follow. They're already booked up. Your regulations required this type of careful planning, and that's exactly what we did. And when Somerville says to you, well, there's no prejudice to win by postponing by 15 days, 30 days, of 45 days, because the Boston situation has now postponed the determination of ultimate application on their situation, that couldn't be further for the truth. All of the preparation work that we've done over the last 10 weeks could be lost. As you know from my letter, one of my critical witnesses, when I spoke with her about the arbitration schedule, she said, that's fine, but I have a family trip for the next 2.5 weeks, from May 16th to May 28th, out of the country. If you push us back by even 2 weeks, that witness likely wouldn't be able to testify. And of course, when I spoke with her in March, I asked her to reserve the time that your rules and regulations suggested that we set aside. As counsel for Somerville informed the commission, there have been meetings ongoing for the past months and weeks. As I mentioned before, we did give Somerville a full project briefing in early December. We met as recently as yesterday. We've offered to meet again next week. And I believe, as one of the commissioners pointed out, conversations can continue. And Wynn hopes that the conversations with Somerville will continue, not just up to April 22nd, which is the deadline for the 30-day period, but over the next 5 or 6 days as we go through the dialogue of selecting an arbitrator, hopefully by agreement, but if not, ultimately with your help, as the rules provide, the conversations can continue. And indeed, during the 20-day window, as information is presented to the arbitrator, hopefully each side, if we haven't reached an agreement, will thoughtfully assess their position as the arbitration process goes forward. As I'm sure the commissioners know, particularly former Judge McHugh, sometimes you need the finality of a trial or an arbitration with a set deadline to get the parties to focus on good faith negotiations, and perhaps you even need to start the trial or the arbitration to actually hear what the information is, and then assessments can be made. So the issues affecting surrounding community agreement with Somerville have been known for months. As council acknowledged, it was in early January that they were officially designated as a surrounding community, and we'd been meeting with them for months before. I certainly think, Judge McHugh, Commissioner McHugh, your suggestion is one that I would be happy to discuss with Wynn, that if we can preserve the schedule so that the arbitration can go forward as scheduled, if it appears that negotiations during that time period could be fruitful to continue, we could ask the arbitrator, again with the commission's permission, to hold his report for another week or 10 days, but at least get the evidence in front of the arbitrator during the time period that it was intended to be presented.
Well, let me try another offshoot of that. Suppose the arbitration went forward and you put on your witnesses and had your arbitrators during that time period, and then you took a pause for a while, and before Somerville put on its case, to give them some time to get up to speed. After all, you're looking for a consensual resolution here. That's the best resolution, right? This would give you an opportunity to get started, let Somerville hear where you're coming from, have the arbitrators proceed on their schedule, and your witnesses proceed on the schedule that they've reserved, and somehow, some way, if there's some leeway, find another time when the arbitrators are available to finish it off. We do have some time in the overall scheme of things. I'm just speaking for myself.
Sure.
I'm thinking out loud with you and with Somerville. What's your visceral reaction to that?
Well, the logistical challenge, Commissioner McHugh, would, of course, if we're working with 3 arbitrators, as the commission is aware,
Right.
the process for arbitrator selection under your guidelines is the parties are asked to try and agree on a single arbitrator
Right.
during that 5-day period, and if no agreement can be reached, each side nominates one, and then those 2 party-appointed arbitrators would endeavor to choose a third, and if that fails during that 5-day period, then the commission makes the appointment at the end of the 5-day period.
Right.
So if we're in the example of a single neutral, then I think the chances of finding a date that neutral was available within a couple of weeks after the end of the 20-day period seems reasonable. If you're dealing with 3 arbitrators and witness schedule and counsel schedule, Commissioner McHugh, it gets a little more complicated. We move in June into the summer in New England when many arbitrators and others like to take advantage of the occasional good weather around here. Scheduling becomes more difficult.
Right, but nobody goes away until July.
It could be done. Your proposal could be accomplished.
Mr. Starr, do you have an indication as to whether you will end up with 1 or 3 arbitrators? Have you had discussions as recent as the last few weeks relative to that?
There have been no discussions about the potential arbitrators. As I read the rules, it was my expectation that at the conclusion of the 22nd, that on behalf of WIN, I would reach out with my nominee and have a discussion with, in this case, counsel for Somerville, and we would begin that process then.
Okay.
I'm certainly not opposed to commencing that process now. It's a week away. I'd be happy to begin that discussion now. If the commission recommended it, I would certainly initiate that.
Well, it seems like if you had the one, that would maximize the chances of your compromise working, and maybe if we incent the city to be cooperative on trying to get this to 1, everybody gives a little and gets what they want. I think that might be a good way to go about it. If the parties start the discussions now and by the 22nd have agreed on a single, then that could work.
It would also facilitate, if we could agree to that now, Chairman Crosby, determining whether that single has a date the 3rd or 4th week of May or the 1st week of June, so that we could accommodate Somerville's request for some additional time, but not get into a delay, which I think would be prejudicial to WIN. We have tried, as I've indicated, to proceed in accordance with the rules as the commission has laid them out.
There's no question about that, but I make the suggestion, as I did the earlier suggestion when Mr. Wright was sitting in that chair, believing that, as I do, that the best solution is a negotiated solution, not the one that the arbitrator decides. That's going to be an either-or kind of solution. And so I look at this in a functional sense and try to figure out a way that we can facilitate forward movement, but at the same time, a forward movement in a context that will help the parties get together for a consensual resolution. So that's where that suggestion comes from.
I do think, Commissioner McHugh, that by holding at least the start dates in place, you provide incentive to both parties to try very hard over the next 5 to 7 days to achieve an agreed-to solution before the costs attendant to an arbitration in terms of the dedication of personnel, and also the risk. Eventually, if the parties are unable to reach an agreement, they turn over to 1 or 3 arbitrators the right under your rules to make the choice, subject to the second look, so to speak. And I don't mean to talk about that now, but not a second look. Subject to what's in the rules and in the regulations. They turn that over, and that also is often a good prod to parties to be very thoughtful and stay focused. And I do appreciate what Counsel for Somerville has said. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday will be difficult days to meet. The WIN folks are committed to meeting again by the middle of next week when we get through the long holiday weekend and continuing the process. So I think your proposal may be a very good one, Commissioner McHugh.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Starr.
Just out of fairness, does Mr. Wright want to say anything about this idea we're working on?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anything that extends this out will allow Somerville to devote its resources towards arbitration. As I said, we have limited resources. We haven't had the opportunity to focus as much on arbitration as we had hoped that this matter would be concluded with a surrounding community agreement negotiated between the parties. That said, you know, a lot of this is news to me. We're unaware of all of WIN's plans. They didn't have any obligation to disclose them to us, but if we had known how much effort they were putting into it, maybe we could be closer at this point to choosing and agreeing on whether it's going to be a 1 or 3 panel arbitration. All that said, I would at least ask you to look at what you've granted to the town of Winthrop and Mohegan Sun. We are, effectively, today is our last day, because the 22nd, it comes after what is essentially a 4-day holiday weekend. So if you could push us out into, is it May 1st, John? Then that would allow us additional time. And then, at that point, if we could look to the solution that Commissioner McHugh, Judge McHugh suggested, which would be something along the lines of an arbitration where the applicant can put on its case. Maybe we can have a pause. We could then discuss, you know, can we resolve this thing? We could also have discussions ongoing during that period, but at least at that point, we'd have a break. Again, we have limited resources. Jason and I are the team for Somerville, along with a few other staff members, and that's it. So we don't have as much flexibility in devoting our resources to a dual track. So if we could go along something along that line of extending this out to May 1st for the deadline, and then focusing on the WIN presentation, a pause, and then the Somerville presentation, I think that would go a long way towards perhaps getting this thing settled rather than ultimately having an arbitrator having to make a decision. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I was wondering if it made sense for Council Blue and I to discuss the proposal where we provide more flexibility to applicants and to communities that come to agreement to have further extensions regarding our deadlines that make sense. Would that
Because your plan, if WIN and Somerville agreed on this morphing plan, under your structure, if we agree with that, you'd be able to let it happen, right? You'd
That's
authorize,
correct.
wouldn't have to come back to us.
That's correct.
So we could say, okay, you talk to these folks and figure out how to make this fit. Yeah.
That's right.
I think that's probably a good idea. So maybe we make this a general decision rather than a case-specific decision, and it gives you the tools to maybe find this middle ground.
Yeah, again, the predicate of the proposal that Council Blue and I put before you is that there's agreement between
Parties
the
agree,
parties.
right, but they're getting close maybe to agreeing to something, and then you could work out the details without our involvement.
Or it's actually the parties, if they work amongst themselves to try to get agreement. I think that
No,
is
but I
first
mean,
and
you could-
foremost.
you could
Oh,
approve it, I
obviously-
mean, yeah,
Obviously, yeah.
right.
I think they're both well aware of that.
Right.
We make some phone calls from now and again.
I think, does everybody agree that probably makes a good idea? So we can thank you folks, and we will see whether we can accommodate what you're talking about in this larger principle that's going to be on the table shortly, or next. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. I just want to take a 5-minute break, then we'll finish this up before we go to lunch, such as it is. Reconvened, and we are back to Ombudsman Ziemba. We are going to jump to your, no, I guess it's all part of the same discussion. Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, in regard to the prior conversations, Council Blue and I have a proposal that would provide more flexibility to applicants and to communities to navigate their way through the arbitration process. What we recommend within the window of that 14 days that we have previously given to the Western Mass application and a number of communities to provide a number of flexibility in meeting any of our specific arbitration deadlines, assuming that there is a mutual agreement between the parties. So in the example that we have here, the parties, if they so agree, could add on an additional 14 calendar days to the overall arbitration period. And for example, regarding the City of Somerville question regarding the timetable or the difficulties that they'll experience over this current weekend, if the applicant agrees, the 5-day period after the beginning of arbitration, within 5 days after the beginning of arbitration, both parties have to submit best and final offers, and they also have to agree on a single arbitrator. If the parties so agreed, they could extend that 5-day period by a number of days that they thought would be useful in having negotiation before you even have to select your arbitrators or put forward your best and final offers. Similarly, if they were okay with selecting the best and final selecting their arbitrator within that 5 days, or if they are okay with putting forward their best and final offers, but they needed more time to arbitrate for whatever reason. If the arbitrators are not available on a specific date, they might be available in a week and a half or 2 weeks. The parties could come to an agreement that we would extend that period, the arbitration period, which is currently at 20 days, they could extend that by up to the 14 days that we're recommending here. So thereby, a lot of the nuances of scheduling and other difficulties could potentially be alleviated, but it could only really be alleviated if both parties work together to try to find solutions to those scheduling difficulties, or if they're both trying to reach agreement. If one party just unilaterally extends a deadline, you do run into some of these issues where people have been trying to meet those deadlines that we previously posted. I certainly do understand the difficulties of a community trying to put forward its best case within the constraints that they have as a municipality. However, I think that this approach where we could provide more flexibility within a range of 14 days, you might have some of the creative solutions such as Judge McHugh just offered, if the parties themselves will agree to work together.
Right. And so in using this case as an example, because I didn't fully understand it in your write-up, but I think I do now, but so you could take 7 of those 14 days and make it from the 22nd to the 29th, and then put the second 7 days, the second week at the end, if they could find an arbitrator who could schedule that final week then, who had the time, right?
Yeah, and there's nothing to say that.
You could split the 14 days up. Yeah,
And the parties don't have to take 14 days if they needed 1 day or 2 days
Right.
in a particular deadline.
Right.
One of the difficulties that we face is that in between commission meetings, we'll get questions from an applicant team or a community saying, we just can't meet this very specific deadline, what are we going to do? And right currently, we're in a position where if there's no scheduled meeting, we can't even post a meeting within 48 hours. We might have an occurrence where communities that are trying to live in the spirit of our overall quest for surrounding community agreements, they may be running afoul of our interim regulations. So we're hoping that this flexibility would lead to more creative solutions. Council Blue?
No, I agree. That would be the point, to let people use those days at the time and in the amount that they thought best for their process.
Where does the 14 come from?
14 comes from what was previously granted to the Western Mass region. And it's a reasonable period that doesn't necessarily impact our overall timeline. One of the consequences of this is that this could potentially, once the Boston process is resolved, in the event that Boston is a surrounding community to one or more, that this could potentially add an addition 14 days to the end of that process if utilized by the parties.
What we heard from Mr., I mean, there are no perfect solutions, but so I'm just testing here. What we heard from Mr. Starr was that potentially some of the arbitrators that they've selected wouldn't be available for 2 or 3 weeks after the thing started, that this wouldn't solve that problem.
But perhaps I think the recommendation that you had, which is that they could have the presentations from one of the arbitrators' teams. If they had a gap where the arbitrator wasn't available for a week, perhaps that arbitrator could then be available after that period. I think that what they're referencing was a consultant that was going to be out for a 2-week period. Again, nothing works unless the parties try to figure out creative solutions.
I was
But
just trying to figure out why, 14 would, 21, what?
the only, it could be 14, it could be 21, it could be a month, it could be 2 months, I think, but what if the risk is to the end of the schedule, assuming that if Boston is labeled a surrounding community, that would otherwise delay the issuance of the license, because that arbitration proceeding would not be able to be completed until the total amount of days are utilized.
And that decision's going to be made May 1, which under our current schedule would require 30 days for negotiation, and then the arbitration process kicks in. And if we added this 14 to that, that would be
the end of August,
Usually around the middle of August,
August.
mid to late August.
August 28th,
we're on a mid-August track now.
Yeah.
go first week to 10 days, yeah.
Yeah, and if we put this 2 weeks onto that, we'd be looking at the end of August, if all
That's
that
correct.
time were taken.
That's correct.
Okay.
And what I think, go ahead.
Go ahead. One thing we'll note is, one thing that Council Blue and I figured out during this conversation regarding the ability of the start and stop scenario that Commissioner McHugh offered. There's a requirement on page 2 of this proposal that the parties can extend arbitrations provided that no later than 10 days after the selection of the arbitrator or arbitrators on filing a best and final offer, they provide notice to the commission. I don't know if we even need that restriction that was provided, that was meant to provide with the commission just a little bit more certainty regarding the timetable. We get requests all the time of when is this process going to begin and end. But this requirement that we know whether or not arbitration was going to extend beyond 20 days by the 10th day, although it seemed like a very good idea at the time, it does impede the flexibility of the parties for the creative solution that was offered today. So I'm not certain we need that. We'd ask all the parties to provide us notice as soon as possible, but we wouldn't prohibit arbitrations from being extended beyond 20 days if they weren't noticed within that first 10 days.
Yeah, we might as well make this as flexible as possible. That was the whole point.
Right.
Right. So it seems to me we would be doing two things with this. One is giving you the tools to fine-tune close cases like this, deal with close cases like this, but also saying to hear applicants in communities from here on out that this is basically the end of the extension business. You know, our deadlines are there for a reason. We're going to build in some flexibility because there are issues from time to time. But don't, if you take your 14 days from the ombudsman, don't be thinking about coming back for more, which I think is reasonable. I don't think you mentioned here, but as we have looked at different requests, as I said, in my mind, there's a two-step test. First, is it both parties? Second, is it prejudicial to somebody else? And that would be something that you need to be attentive to, obviously, in the use of your 14 days. You know, if the use of the 14 days, you know, does something to somebody else or bumps the whole deadline or something or kicks an 85 million into another fiscal year or anything like that, then I would trust you'd be reluctant to use the 14 days. But so long as you're mindful of that, which I know you will be.
Yeah, I think the process would be if the parties agree that they wanted to extend, I think that they'd face a little opposition or no opposition whatsoever from.
As long as it didn't have some other ripple effect like the 85 million kind of thing.
Correct, right, as
Right.
we're,
Right.
yeah, into Region A
Right.
territory,
Right.
I think we're.
Free of that one, but there may be other ones.
Correct,
you know,
yeah.
Election days, whatever. Are you thinking about it? You look like you were.
No, I was thinking about a collateral issue, and which was triggered by what you just said a minute ago, and I still have some concerns that I'll voice at an appropriate time about 30 days and 30 days once we make the surrounding or host community decision regarding Boston that I'd like to think about, and I don't want what we do today to be viewed as foreclosing an opportunity to discuss those issues, that's all.
Yeah, I know, I see why you picked up on that, and I understand that.
But I don't, Mr. Chair, I don't think you were saying someone couldn't come to us, but please, we feel like we're already being flexible
Yeah.
with the 14 days, but we didn't preclude someone.
No.
Or,
No, just a signal that
Right.
somewhere along the line, there's got to be an end to this, but no, it's not, you wouldn't be precluded at all.
Mr. Chairman, in the memo, there's also the option for non-mutual extensions, but based on this conversation, I'm assuming that that is probably not an idea that is going to be approved by the commission.
Where's the reference to that?
So at the second to last paragraph, just another option for the commission to consider would be for a smaller subset of days that the commission could explore whether or not a non-mutual extension would be warranted. But again, that a non-mutual proposal does run into difficulties regarding such issues as the timing and other things that we've talked about.
I really don't think we want to get into the business of creating a new set of decision points or choke points for a process like that. We just can't move swiftly enough to be effective. We chew up all the time, and we've got a 48-hour requirement to schedule a hearing, and so I think this has got to be a consensual process. I think the best thing to do if we go down this path is to delegate to you the power to approve use of those up to 14 days and to, or 21, whatever we decide, but and to encourage you as you have in the past to help the parties get over rough spots and try to help them find mutually agreeable scheduling solutions where they seem to be a little stuck. It seems to me that's the most flexible.
But did that mean that you would leave the mutual request in or not?
The mutual request would stay in.
That would be a precondition.
that would be a precondition, but we understand that,
John can encourage
yes,
mutuality.
and help the parties find
Yeah.
ways to agree. Right.
Okay. I could actually go either way on that. I mean, I think giving, on something like this and giving you maximum flexibility, you know, I think we have complete confidence in you, and you're talking such small days that it's not gonna be the end of the world, but
Oh, you mean, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you, Mr. Chairman. You mean perhaps giving the ombudsman the power to grant non-mutual
right.
extensions?
This paragraph that he just referred to, you know,
Right.
it's, he might say, he's saying, the suggestion was maybe for non-mutual, the ombudsman could on his or her own do up to 7 days for non-mutual, you know. I don't feel terribly strongly about it.
Well, I rethink that, and I would be happy to delegate to the ombudsman the power to grant, to facilitate facilitate mutual agreements or to grant non-mutual agreements within a 14-day window.
I think I would too. I just, you know, it's really, there's really no need to take up commission time
Right.
for stuff like this.
Right.
And you'll make a judgment. If you think it's complicated enough or the equities are hard to figure out, you'll bring it to us. But you have the option of using up to 14 days, however you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the proposal before is, it's a very easy proposal to
Right.
grant mutually accepted proposals. As we've seen here, it gets quite murky, even with a couple of days regarding whether or not somebody is available or not.
But here, all we're talking about is
Yeah.
whether we would grant you the right, grant you the authority to go ahead and even permit non-mutual up to 14 days if in your judgment you felt you wanted it. So I think what we're talking about here is pretty much taking the wraps off for 14 days. For purposes of getting this all done, we would be delegating you the flexibility up to 14 days for pretty much however you wanted to use it, to put it
Okay,
simply.
just so, for direction for me, if we had a test case such as what we have seen today, where a WIN representative said 14 days will blow through their schedule, and you have an applicant on the other side that says, a community that says, we would need those 14 days, it might, I don't,
What would you do?
We're putting you in a
what
tough
should I do?
position.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well,
Obviously, if you don't know, you come back to
I
this.
don't think he does.
Then,
well, it was recommended in the,
that's what
No,
I'm
I'm
saying.
It's in the-
putting forward an option for the commission, because it's a very,
well, which would you prefer? Which facilitates you doing your job the best?
well, my job has been as the man in the middle, which makes it quite difficult to satisfy both
We'll-
ends of that.
Right,
We'll take the
Status.
responsibility if there's a
all right,
problem.
fine, okay. So so we go back to the mutual with tremendous flexibility on the 14 days, it's if there is a mutual agreement for a strategy, that you have the authority to do that on your own hook. Okay. Anything else? Do we need to try to put that into the form of a vote?
You should, because we've got a regulation now. that-
All right, so be my guest.
So I move that the commission authorize Ombudsman Ziemba to allow mutually agreed-upon extensions of the several arbitration deadlines, so long as the total number of days of extension does not exceed 21 days.
Where'd 21 come from?
I just threw it in there. No, that was in the back of my mind. The proposal was 14.
Yes.
I was
Okay.
going to suggest 21.
Do I have a second? Quickly
So
before he
what
changes
is,
mind?
is it a second on the 14th?
Yeah,
14.
right.
Second.
Right,
That was my Freudian slip.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it unanimously. So that gives you the tools to work with the parties, and it looks like we can probably work something out. The Somerville and Wynn parties. Okay. Do we have anything else with you, Ombudsman Ziemba? Before we take our lunch break, I am going to move one, I guess we're going to go to item 5, the legal report, because we do want to have all of the commissioners here for that. And then we'll take a lunch break and come back with the racing division. Who's up? Catherine?
Thank you, Chairman Crosby and Commissioners. Let me pull this a little bit here. The next topic is the monitoring regulations that the Commission has been working on. At this point, we've had the opportunity to, Commissioner Zuniga has worked with us quite a bit on making some changes to try to comport, I think, with more the process that we have anticipated. I think as we begin any of the discussion with it, though, we want to convey that this is a sort of a work in process, or design development, as we keep talking about. But the idea here is to get a process, get a monitoring process described, have it on record where everybody can participate and see the basic rules, recognizing that as we do that, this is a very new process. Penn is already basically under construction, moving forward with that project, and we want to make sure we facilitate, observe and listen, but don't act as a barrier. So I think we've got the emergency, this regulations, we like to have them adopted by the Commission as emergency regulations, which means, of course, that they would go in effect for 90 days while we conducted the regular process to continue to explore changes if necessary. We have the latest draft is in your packet under item 5A is where I found mine. Hope yours is in the same place. I don't know how much we want to actually go through each one of these regulations. There was some, I did get some comment from Penn that I would like to talk about briefly about some suggestions and what we think might be appropriate. But from there, Commissioner Zuniga, you have a comment?
Yeah, well, let me just mention or try to summarize one of the major points that are new to these regs since the last version. You know, I think we've done a lot of polishing. I'm very happy as where they stand. I will explain one item and then address two items that Penn commented on the latest version, perhaps for everybody's background. But one change since the last version is this idea of a design review process that we currently have just the way these proposals are put together, conceptual designs, pretty drawings, and the like. Very important site elements and draft environmental reports in some instances, but otherwise very conceptual drawings. The idea here is that similar to the way we are approving a schedule or looking at a schedule and continue to monitor, we would look at a design narrative. After the award of the license, it would include more drawings, but we would come at some point to look at something that's critical, which is the basis for the design, after which packages are put out to bid and eventually constructed, obviously. The difficulty here, which is, I think is addressed by regulation, but one of the comments from Penn was relative to this approval of the design review or the design elements sometime into the future after the award of the license. And the way I think it's addressed properly in the regulation, again, since we last saw it, has been revised, is that the commission or its agent may approve such design drawings. And they're limited to the architectural and the site drawings. Where I suspect Penn is coming from in terms of their comment, which is right on point, is that there may be more than one of these design packages. They are building their project on a design build process, which really means they're going to be doing many of these small iterations of design and construction packages. So I think the comment is valid, but I think the regulation provides for that flexibility, and I think it's, I would let it stand as it's drafted here.
Which comment? There's several.
Commissioner
They made.
Zuniga, the staff also agree with your, what you're just completed with, and it's 135. 13503,
Yeah.
Section 4 and 5. And we took a look at, we definitely, the points Penn has made in their short brief response is clear, is what they're worried about is the approval process interfering in their ability to move forward with construction because they are in a design construction format. Only I think it's important for us to note that in Section 4, what it says is the commission or its representative may request for review and approval, and it's the final site plan. So that particular section wouldn't interfere in the ongoing process as such.
Right.
And they also had the concern about number 5, which is the commission's representative, again, may request construction packages for review. There's no approval actually incorporated in that particular sentence. So the flexibility is there, the ability for us to keep in track, because I think as Commissioner Zuniga has said, that the actual construction packages do tell more about what, if the design is actually going forward, than the design itself. So we think their sections, their suggestions there, we understand them, we recognize that ability and the need for us to work together on it, but we don't think that part of their request, we would agree with Commissioner Zuniga to not incorporate those.
How about 13502, where it is a shall,
Well-
and they're suggesting, all significant or major stages?
Yeah,
We-
that's one thing that I would agree with their comment, and it's easily addressed if we simply insert the word major
Correct, right.
stages.
I thought that was legitimate as well.
That would be 13502 subsection 2,
Yes,
subparagraph A,
yeah,
where it says all stages, we could simply say all major stages.
right.
There's another paragraph where that applies as well. Same section, no.
Paragraph 4 of 13502 has major in it as well. I think it's the
Right.
one you're referring to, Commissioner Zuniga. And-
I noted 13502 subsection 5 subparagraph D. Would also, I would also insert major stages of construction, even though that really refers to the project schedule. But I think that addresses their concern.
We concur with your recommendation.
In regard to 13503, 2 and 3, isn't that something that they've included? Well, 2,
135.0.
03,
03.
2. Isn't that something that they were required to include in the application?
Not the narrative, Commissioner. What we're introducing here is a narrative that, and I was going to insert for clarification a sentence that says stipulating the basis for the design.
But there is a part of the site design component of the application that requires the basis of design narrative
For site or for building or both?
for both,
Okay.
I think.
Maybe it does for site. I don't know that it does for building. And perhaps this is belts and suspenders. If it's already required in the application, then it's also required by regulation here for monitoring, and it would be just fine.
Okay. Have the Pink and site design consultants, I'm sorry, yeah, the site design consulting team looked at these regs? I'm thinking-
More than a few times. Yes,
Pardon me?
extensively and a few times in iteration.
Okay. I was thinking particularly of one of the site design consultants who went through the Pittsburgh process.
Yes.
Has she looked at them?
No, but it's actually with her experience in mind that a lot of this is, I remember that presentation well, what Pittsburgh went through, and it's with that in mind that a lot of this is put together, in my view anyway.
Well, it wouldn't hurt before, are these proposed, is a vote on these proposed for today as an
Yeah.
emergency basis?
Yes.
Yes, it is, and we have went through a process too of review with both of our firms that were qualified for monitoring as well, and as Penn, essential review at this point, I believe. That's why we think it's important for us to go ahead with emergency regs if at all possible.
There's another, there's another element which is something I made the point of last time we were ready to adopt this as emergency, which is that by reference, we have the ability and intend to use it, to add issue guidelines for clarification in terms of format, additional information, et cetera, which I think is the right way to write regulations. There were instances where we had inserted a couple of those things in regulation that would be hard to amend, or not hard, but just lengthy, I guess. So there's there's the tool to issue guidelines from time to time here that it's embedded. That would be very helpful in my view.
I might, just for clarification's sake too, Penn did suggest on 135.025E. The last sentence reads, now, in the event the hiring of the aforementioned persons does not comply with the goals established, the licensee shall submit within 20 days of the request by the commission a plan to bring the hiring into compliance with the goals. What we would actually recommend is the additional language that was supplied by Penn, which basically adds in, right after commission, a response as to why the goals have not been achieved and identify any good faith efforts that have been undertaken to achieve those goals, and then leaving the last part, a plan to bring the hiring into compliance with goals. We basically talked about those steps anyway and asking for that information. So it would seem reasonable to basically make those three, those two changes. One is adding in major in 135.02A, adding that phrases that I just described in 135.025E, and then leaving the regulation as it is in 135.03. I should note, because we started out kind of in the middle, is that since our last draft, we have added a definition of project here, so it is clear what the project is that we'll be monitoring. As Commissioner Zuniga has stated in 135.02.1, we have added the ability to create guidelines. Part of the concern in the last version of the regulations was there was extensive detail for the review. We thought, well, it would be better to actually take some of that detail out, develop a handbook or a guideline that would be used in the process of monitoring the project by the project monitoring firm. So that was added in. A number of the 2A, for instance, was shortened quite dramatically to take out a lot of the detail that was in it about how it would be approved, what the days were, 30 and 60, to allow us to work with Penn and work with the commission to bring the actual design approval, or the project approval here to the commission, and do that in a fashion that would work with Penn to be able to get prepared for it, and work with the commission to have the detail we needed here, rather than trying to outline it altogether in that area. We talked, part of the change we just talked about is to make sure there was a process if the proposed hiring plan did not go forward, is to have a process of coming before the commission to make sure that there was a explanation of why that didn't occur. The other, on page 3, there's a F that's in red. That's actually just a reordering that was already in existence, but we put it in that place as well. The big addition is, as Commissioner Zuniga described, was this section of 13503, which is the design review process, in order to make sure that we actually had a look at the design itself. We did, Commissioner McHugh has mentioned the initial part. We did have a discussion also with the contract monitor about, well, a lot of this particular part of the process is already underway. We thought in this case, it doesn't actually hurt to have that as a foundation for our monitor, but doesn't hurt as well to include it at this point as we move forward with the design review. So we did discuss that may be a duplication, but would also be able to give us an opportunity to clarify what that initial design was as we begin monitoring. And then we talked about the 4 and 5, the attempt to bring construction packages, connect those a little bit better with the design itself, clarified the access to records and information, and as we move forward, we went through the process that the applicants need to go forward to get final approval in the commissioners in that time frame. And I forgot to mention here, as we talked about right of inspect, we took a lot of the shalls and mays and anys out, and we consolidated that to give flexibility to our contract monitor to request additional information that they may need to identify the primary elements that are going to be taking a look at the commission. Later on today, we do have Jennifer Pink coming forward as well to talk about their process of those areas that they plan are most significant to their monitoring, to have that discussion with the commission, and then get any redirection or clarification that you might give us as well. So we thought this book of framework would be good for us to ask the commission to put in place via emergency regulation while we move forward with the rest of the project.
Further comments? Did you want to request that it be reviewed by that consultant? Was that?
No, she can take it. I mean,
Yeah, okay.
Commissioner Zuniga says he remembers everything she said, so I mean, I'm sure it's done. And she can take a look, you know, this is an ongoing evolutionary
Yes.
process, so it's fine.
Right,
It's
okay.
fine.
I do remember the main point she said, not everything she said.
No,
More than
it's
I
fine,
remember.
and we do need to put it in place now, this is ongoing, so.
Okay, great. Then Commissioner Zuniga, do you want to?
Sure. I would then move that this commission adopt by emergency the regulations presented in the packet here labeled 205 CMR 135 as amended and edited with the discussions that took place just now.
Which is-
Second.
And there's two edits, right? There's two changes, the major,
Correct.
the major and the additional words. Yeah.
13502
Yeah.
and 13502A and 13502.5E.
Right, okay. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. While we have General Counsel Blue, today is the deadline for receiving submissions relative to the gaming establishment question. I guess it's COB, is it?
It is close of business today. This is the deadline for receiving the first set
Right.
of briefs. The responses are due on the 24th, which is a week from today. So we will be looking to see what comes in, either in hard copy in the office or monitoring email or through MGC comments today. We will do our best to get them all posted tomorrow so that folks have them to respond to for the deadline next week.
But do we have anything yet?
We have nothing as of yet.
Really?
That I know of, unless they came in hard copy while we've been here. So,
People
Okay.
love deadlines, right?
Yeah.
yes, they do.
Right.
Still be here.
450.
Is it, it's so, and it's close of business, so we're talking about 5 o'clock. So anything submitted after 5 o'clock will not be accepted?
We would look at that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
We'd have to know exactly when they came in, but we obviously want as much input as we can on this topic, but we would certainly not expect to take things that came in tomorrow, for example. That would be past the deadline.
Right, okay. 5:05 maybe, but
Maybe, yes.
not tomorrow. Okay, then I think we are ready to take a lunch break. How long? 45? So, well, let's try 2:15.
Yeah.
2:15?
Yeah.
We'll try to reconvene at 2:15. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.